Chapter 1196. Tantai Pingjing stared at the young man who could be said to be God's favored son with a little pity in her eyes. However, when such a tall and eye-catching woman like her took a step forward, not only did the South Sea Chi trainers and the leading Guanyin sect retreat, even Li Mofan did not dare to take it lightly. He raised his arm and made a gesture that all the generals and soldiers in the Bailiang army could understand. The dragon elephant cavalry suddenly bloomed with an indescribable aura, like a tiger out of its cage, hot and wild. More than 1,000 elite cavalry began to spread out rapidly, forming an aggressive fan-shaped formation. A few groups of roaming cavalry even swept behind the South Sea Chi trainers. Obviously, they had made up their minds to make a big fuss and wrap these arrogant immortals in the South Sea up like dumplings. The charcoal girl was actually not seriously injured, but she did not dare to act rashly because she was severely suppressed by Su Longxiang's momentum. Now that her senior sister was personally involved, she was emboldened. She jumped down to the ground, rubbed her only son, and gnashed her teeth. She could not wait to cut the yellow-skinned young man into pieces and throw his 3 souls and 7 spirits into the most important weapon of the sect, the Moonwell Sky Mirror, which was specially used to suppress evil and evil. There were 5 generations in the Guanyin sect. Tantai Pingjing, who was close to 100 years old and had an almost eternal appearance, and the charcoal girl were the pair of senior sisters with the highest seniority. The age gap between them was so big that it made people speechless. Then there were 6 old elders whose hair was as white as frost. Meiyingyi, Sunya, and Qi Longzhong were the younger Qi trainers of the next generation. The 4th generation were the direct disciples of the 6 elders. Finally, there were the young boys and girls who had just entered the sect. There were more than 100 Qi trainers of the 5 generations. Almost every one of them had one or a variety of talisman weapons, such as the land-facing celestial painting of the charcoal girl and the dragon pendant that was destroyed when catching the dragon in Shu Land. They were all the most important weapons of the Guanyin sect. In addition, there was the Discipline Elder's willow branch clear vase, which was only 3 inches high but actually weighed 600 pounds. Naturally, there was a universe inside. Sunya's coiling dragon stone block that contained thunder and lightning could suppress evil and evil. It was also a work of God that was in accordance with the way of heaven. Talisman swords were even more common in the field of Qi trainers. It was just that the Guanyin sect was seriously damaged in the dragon-slaying battle in the southern border. Therefore, there was the storm of asking for 81 talisman swords from the Dragon Rock sword furnace of the Yuyan Mountain Villa. Later, there were 2 famous swordsmen in the world who came uninvited, Dong Tai and Sui Xiegu. The latter enjoyed eating swords, which made the Guanyin sect, which had a strong foundation, feel even more difficult to deal with. Tantai Pingjing did not have the demeanor of a master like her junior sister who had provoked the charcoal girl. She just walked forward like an ordinary strong woman, as if she had met an acquaintance and wanted to greet him. But this time, Su Longxiang waited for an opportunity for a longer time. Especially when Tantai Pingjing imperceptibly paused or even took a step back, Su Longxiang was in a trance, as if he had returned to his childhood in the prince's mansion on Mount Qingliang and became a silly Huang man. Su Longxiang seemed to have thought of something. He scratched his head and looked relieved. His brother had said that when encountering something that he could not figure out, he should just stop thinking about it. Whether he could beat his opponent or not, he should prove it with his fists. If he could not beat his opponent, he should just run away. The green hills would not change, and the green water would flow forever. At the worst, he could just say that he would meet his opponent again someday. Without the knot in his heart, Su Longxiang's entire aura and appearance changed completely. This was not strange in the eyes of the dragon elephant cavalry led by Li Mofan, but in the eyes of the Qi cultivators of the Guanyin sect who were good at observing aura, it was strange. With the war imminent, when experts faced the enemy, the change of the state of mind was a big taboo. The kind of freak who broke through the bottleneck in several life and death battles and was able to rise from the brink of death was, after all, a rare existence. In the Liang Wulin where heroes gathered for the past 100 years, Wang Xianji counted as one, Gu Jiantang counted as half, and the other outstanding figures like Li Chungang and Chao Chongqing, who were publicly recognized as having outstanding talent, also rose in realms naturally. Of course, after Su Fengnian defeated Wang Xianji, as many rumors, true or false, gradually spread, Su Fengnian became another martial arts genius after Wang Xianji who was proficient in using battle to nurture battle. Otherwise, the people of Jianghu really could not understand how a playboy who had not even practiced martial arts for 5 years could leap to the top and become the champion of Jianghu. Was it not enough that the Su family had one Su Fengnian, who was said to be invincible in the world, and now there was another Su Longxiang? All the good things in the world had been taken by the Su family. Did they still want to give others a way to live? Was it possible that one day Su Fengnian would get tired of being the world's number one and hand over the number one position to his younger brother? Nowadays, the so-called powerful and influential families in the Jianghu were all based on whether or not there were two first-pin experts in the sect who could stand side by side. Of course, if only one person reached the celestial state, it was enough to lead the sect and overlook the Jianghu. But there was absolutely no reason for one family or one sect to have two experts in martial arts. Even the Wu family's sword tomb could not do this, because it was much more difficult than the 3 princes of the 4th generation, the father and the son, and the 2 top scholars in the imperial court. At this time, in the eyes of the qi cultivator, the flow of the qi of the prominent young man was like a ball of prairie fire turning into a pool of stagnant water. A moment ago, it was full of vitality, but in the next moment, it was completely lifeless and lifeless. Tantai Pingjing, whose figure was even better than that of the northern warriors, stopped and walked. Finally, she was only 5 or 6 steps away from Su Longxiang. She lowered her head and looked at the interesting young man who was born as King Kong but deliberately suppressed the rising of his realm. She smiled and said, "Come and hit me. If you hit me, you win. In the future, I will follow your brother's orders in Liuzhou." Su Longxiang shook his head with a serious expression. Tantai Pingjing smiled knowingly. She had already understood the young man's meaning. That is, in the territory under the jurisdiction of Beiliang, no matter who it was, as long as they set foot in Beiliang, they would have to listen to her brother. This principle did not require him to defeat anyone to win. This was a matter of course. Before her brother inherited the title and became the king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian's words had always been the loudest in Mount Qingliang. He was even more powerful than their father, Su Shao. Now that he had become the vassal king, not only his mansion, but also the whole Beiliang should be the same. Tantai Pingjing was not angry. She still had a clean smile on her face. The qi cultivators of Fulong of the North sect all said that the Guanyin sect was carved out of the same mold. It was not without roots. Except that the qi cultivators of this sect all wore white clothes and white boots, even their temperament was the same. They all had a kind of otherworldly spirit. They did not respect the common people or the kings, but only ghosts and gods. Every qi cultivator left the sect, except for dry food and clothes. They were not allowed to carry any worldly possessions other than the talisman weapons that they had cultivated for many years. They had no attachments and no worldly karma. Only then could they achieve a pure Taoist heart. For example, once the qi cultivators of all generations of the Guanyin sect entered the isolated island in the South Sea to practice Taoism, it was tantamount to cutting off all the fate with their birth parents. Even if their parents had passed away, they would never go to worship them. The Tao of Heaven was ruthless, but there were common laws. Qi cultivators were the fishermen who mended the wide net of Tao of Heaven and caught the fish that escaped the net. Therefore, the great immortal Qi Xianzhu on the demon-slaying platform once sent a message to the Guanyin sect. In fact, it was more like a question: Tao of Heaven has 50. Why does the Tao of Heaven only give rise to 49? The sage said that people escape from one, but where is the one? This was the reason why Tantai Pingjing had been in closed-door training all these years. At that time, Dong Tai raised the sea and drowned the Guanyin sect with his sword. His momentum was imposing, but in fact, it was not the real reason why Tantai Pingjing came out of closed-door training in advance. It was because she had been in closed-door training for many years but could not find the one. This time, Tantai Pingjing moved the sect to the north because she wanted to find it somewhere else. Tantai Pingjing had always been silent in the Guanyin sect. She did not take any disciples. She had been in charge of the sect for nearly 60 years and had accumulated a lot of power. Even the elders would feel uncomfortable when they saw this young suzerain who was almost enlightened, not to mention the juniors like Mei, Sunya, and Qi Longzhong. They would be satisfied if they could talk to the suzerain who was really high in status and figure for a year. These people all felt that the suzerain had a rare affection from the bottom of her heart for this young man. Regardless of gender, many disciples of the Guanyin sect who did not have a deep heart were a little jealous. Tantai Pingjing was not far away from Su Longxiang. Her smile was tranquil and quiet. However, a little illusory green water droplet appeared in front of her out of nowhere. The water droplet fell down and formed two water lines. It was like a drawing of the moon and ripples were bursting. In an instant, a big round mirror was constructed between her and Su Longxiang. The mirror was sparkling and the green water ripples were rippling. They looked at each other and their vision was blurred. From Su Longxiang's side, he could only see the rough outline of the other party. The Qi cultivators of the Guanyin sect looked at each other in dismay. Even the highly experienced charcoal girl was extremely moved. In the final analysis, the reason why the Guanyin sect could compete with the Northern Dragon warriors of the entire Liang dynasty was actually because of two talisman weapons. The celestial painting from the painting saint of the Dafeng dynasty was to suppress Yuxiu in Jianghu. The Moonwell heavenly mirror in front of the suzerain's senior sister was to suppress all kinds of Bel spirits in the world who insisted on breaking the shackles of Tao. Both of them were favored by the Reiki of heaven and earth because of fate. However, the more powerful things were, the more they would not be controlled and wanted to cross the thunder pool. The Guanyin sect had to suppress these two guys who were not satisfied with the gift of Tao of heaven. After Tantai Pingjing appeared in the mirror, she smiled and stretched out her hand to Su Longxiang, indicating that the young man did not need to show mercy and could just do his best. Chapter 1197. Then, everyone saw Su Longxiang fiercely crash into the mirror and appear in front of Tantai Pingjing. He punched down. Most of the Guanyin sect disciples, who had never seen their sect's national weapon in their lives, let out a subconscious gasp. But then, they saw their sect master's entire body shatter like an artifact made of colored glass, turning into fireflies that filled the sky. Without any hesitation, Su Longxiang rushed to the next place. As expected, another mirror soon appeared in front of him. After he crashed into it again, Tantai Pingjing, who had broken the glass body, repeated this tirelessly. On the yellow sand ground, in the short time it took for an incense stick to burn, Su Longxiang had entered the mirror and broken the glass no less than 100 times. Every time before the body was broken, Tantai Pingjing would always have a calm smile. The fiercer Su Longxiang's attacks were, the more it set off her confidence and the profoundness of her Taoist technique. A lieutenant rode to Li Mofen's side. He was full of doubts and could not help but ask, "General, what is going on? Is that woman really a deity?" Although Li Mofen was proficient in all kinds of martial arts and was a top expert in cavalry on the battlefield, he had never experienced the obscure supernatural powers of the Qi cultivators. He could not make heads or tails of it, but he could not put down his pride and say that he did not know in front of his subordinates. He could only pretend to be profound and said slowly, "The Qi cultivators of the North and South have their own merits. The North sect is like a big rat stealing food from a big warehouse, but what they consume is the Emperor's aura. As for the group of people from Guanyin sect in the South, they focus on eating clouds and thunder from heaven and earth to nourish their spirit and Qi. The strange mirror of the Guanyin sect master is probably similar to the Daoist's heaven and earth sleeve and the Buddhist's Mount Sumro in a mustard seed. The bearded lieutenant held back for a long time and laughed dryly. "General, you are really knowledgeable. You even know this. No wonder the general said that you are one of the top Confucian generals in our Beiliang army." Li Mofan laughed and scolded, "Get lost. After so many years of flattery, your skills have not improved at all. What Confucian general? I earned the position of the deputy commander of the Longxiang army by leading the troops time and time again. Which Confucian general is not a bastard hiding behind the battlefield and waving a fan and talking nonsense?" The lieutenant said with grievance, "I want to be a Confucian general." Li Mofan sneered, "Look at your sloppy pig slaughtering appearance. Don't even think about being a Confucian general in your next life." On the battlefield, Su Longxiang, one's disciples of the Guanyin sect were gathered. Obviously, he used the military strategy of besieging the city. Guanyin sect master could escape but his disciples could not. Of the Guanyin sect master, but his disciples could not. Guanyin sect master of the Guanyin sect could escape, but his disciples could not. Of Guanyin sect master could. Tantai Pingjing appeared behind Su Longxiang. With her back to the dragon elephant cavalry's fan-shaped formation, she reached out and patted the mirror in front of her. In the next moment, a mirror appeared in front of Mei Yi and the Guanyin sect disciples. Su Longxiang rushed past and arrived in front of Tantai Pingjing in the blink of an eye. This was a scene that went against the rules of the world and was extremely strange. Su Longxiang's stubborn nature came up. He did not rush towards the woman who did not dare to face him head-on. He turned back and continued to run towards the Guanyin sect disciples. Instead, he ran even faster. For the first time, he changed direction. His speed was so fast that people could only see a blurry figure. Then, within a radius of 1,000 feet, Su Longxiang was everywhere. This scene was very similar to the method used by Wang Xianji in the battle with useless monk. In the world of martial arts, as long as one reached the peak, all paths led to the same destination. There was no escape from the two words, speed and accuracy. One was to take the initiative, the other was to have a clear target. Having both was equivalent to being in an invincible position and achieving victory. In the battle of swordsmanship in the world, no matter how big the differences between the two factions were, there was no objection to the two words of speed and accuracy. The peach blossom sword god Dong Tai was able to suppress all the swordsmen in the world before Li Chungang reappeared in Jianghu because his flying sword had the reputation of flowing fire in the heavens. As time went by, Su Longxiang still could not touch a corner of the clothes of Tantai Pingjing and the disciples of the Guanyin sect. Even Li Mofan was a little anxious, not to mention the group of officers and commandants who were as rough and unyielding as the sandstorm in the northwest. They were all eager to have a try. As soon as they heard the order, they would spur their horses to charge and kill everyone, regardless of whether they were immortals or chi trainers. At this moment, a black dot in the distance was approaching steadily. Gradually, people could see the figure clearly. He came alone and stood outside the dragon elephant cavalry and the Guanyin sect. The three of them were like two horns to each other. But 1,000 dragon elephant cavalry and more than 100 chi trainers, who had the absolute advantage in numbers, could not take away the slightest bit of the man's elegance and momentum. He stood there alone, completely overshadowing the limelight of the two. The Beiliang army, which had the best combat power in the world, had always only recognized two things. The Su, in General Su Zhao's name and the means of subduing people by force. In fact, in the final analysis, it was the word force. Because the old Prince Liang, Su Zhao, was the king of Beiliang, who was the pillar of the country and had great military achievements. He won his position by killing half of the young men in the spring and autumn period. Then, after Su Zhao, another person from the Su family took over the vacancy left by the death of Ren Tuesday originally, most people thought that this was a feat that even the gods could not do after Su Zhao's death. But that person did it. It was very simple. He killed Wang Xianji. At this moment, Su Fengnian was standing here. When he received the news that the Guanyin sect and the Wu family's sword mound had entered the country respectively, he naturally valued the latter more. He was prepared to personally go to the border between the two provinces to welcome them. As for his younger brother, Huang Man, it did not matter whether he was escorting the Qi cultivators of the South Sea or showing off his strength. With how much Su Fengnian doted on Huang Man, there was nothing in the world that Huang Man, could not do. But at the last moment, Su Fengnian was still not at ease. After all, the wealth that the Guanyin sect had accumulated over hundreds of years could not be underestimated. The charcoal girl's crafty tricks in Yanji County and the land pilgrimage map almost caused him, the so-called most powerful person in the world, to fall into her trap. Therefore, he changed his mind halfway. He wanted to see Huang Man, with his own eyes before he went to welcome the 100 withered swordsmen of the sword mound. Perhaps Su Fengnian himself did not feel that there was anything wrong with looking on with folded arms. However, whether it was the 1,000 brave and valiant dragon elephant cavalry led by Li Mofin, or the 100 over-Qi refinement warriors of the South Sea who were ignorant and inexperienced but had heard of his name like thunder, they all felt a kind of silent and enormous pressure. Especially those cavalry soldiers under the Su flag. They all subconsciously tightened their grip on their iron spears. They were afraid that the vassal king would look down on their invincible Longxiang army. And to the Qi cultivators, that Wang Xianji of the martial emperor city was the biggest fish that escaped the net in the world. But no matter if it was the Qi cultivators of the south or the north, they could not do anything to him. Then, with the death of the old monster Wang, this suffocating feeling that was enough to make people despair was imperceptibly transferred to the young vassal king. Who dared to face this person as an enemy? This person wasn't someone who could be challenged just because they had more people. At the very least, no matter how many people there were, could they be more than the 300,000 Bailiang cavalry under his command? Tantai Pingjing turned her head and looked at the slightly abrupt slender figure in the distance. Under her eyes, there was a trace of indescribable complex emotions. Su Longxiang had already fallen into a state of madness. He lowered his head and clenched his fists. He was far from being exhausted, but he began to gasp for breath like an ancient fierce beast. His qi had traveled no less than 700 miles in an instant. This had already crossed the Dragon Gate threshold of 600 miles in the new martial arts list. Tantai Pingjing withdrew her gaze. Coincidentally, Su Longxiang turned his head and she saw the young man's red eyes. If it was just a naughty and mischievous young man's playfulness before, and he did not really want to hurt people, then at this moment, Su Longxiang really had the intention to kill. He had a pure heart. Doing good came from his heart, and doing evil was also straightforward. Chapter 1198. There was a saying in Tianluan, sage Shang of Confucianism, that the way of heaven was constant. It did not exist for sages, nor did it die for ferocious people. It meant that the way of heaven was unpredictable. Although man was the head of all spirits, he could not interfere with the eternal operation of the way of heaven. This undoubtedly brought great confusion to Qi trainers who carried out justice on behalf of heaven. They had to be careful every time they went fishing, for fear that they would go in the opposite direction of the way of heaven. At that time, Qi trainers would have to bear the karma. This was also why Taoist immortals who cultivated themselves alone could often ascend to heaven, but great Qi trainers often could not die well, let alone become immortals. For example, at this time, it was difficult for Tantai Pingjing to judge whether Su Longxiang was good or bad, and whether she should detain his soul into the moonwell. In fact, in the moonwell sky mirror, in addition to those recognized evil leaders, there were many famous sages. However, Qi trainers often kept the latter a secret. The reason why gentlemen were often beheaded for 5 generations was that Qi trainers were often the executioners. What sages did might be good for the common people or benefit the country, but they did not necessarily follow the way of heaven. In history, there were so many earth-shaking reforms. The common people benefited, but those who carried out the reforms often ended miserably, and even might not be reincarnated after death. As the Confucianism said, although there were thousands of people, this majestic heroic spirit was passed down from generation to generation, but it was not necessarily a blessing for the individual. However, this was precisely the most valuable thing about those scholars who helped the world. The young lord standing in the distance sneered at scholars when he was a teenager. In Gangnam-do, he even dared to ask Liang Tongxi's sword Immortal, who was now Wang Chaodong, if he could sell some benevolence, righteousness, and morality. The reason why he had changed his view of scholars over the years was that he could look further and higher after reaching a high position. He had more and more respect for scholars who really cared about the world and had no regrets. Because in the world, those who had a heart were often the ones who carried the burden and staggered forward to open the way for the future generations. Wang Xianji was like that in Jianghu, and so was Sun Ping in Zhangjiulu. Huang Sanzhou was even more so. This kind of people, even if they were enemies, could be killed but not hated. The founding of a prosperous dynasty was always made by warriors to open the way and scholars to build the road conscientiously. Only then could the common people walk on that road happily and comfortingly. Tantai Pingjing's eyes were still filled with pity as she looked at the butcher's second son in front of her. Liang and Beiliang, one of the nominal territories, were in a deadlock. Removing the vassals was the general trend, but resisting Beimang's iron cavalry was a top priority. The imperial court was not at ease with letting the shrewd Gu Jiantang be a king with a different surname, but they also could not allow the two generations of the Su family to take advantage of their achievements. On the other hand, Su Zhao's military achievements had reached the point where no one could take credit for them. So many outrageous killings, but Su Zhao's life was tough and he stood upright, so God gave him a way out and let him die of old age. However, the old man's wife and 4 children were inevitably affected. Everyone had a rough life. If Su Zhihu was not the reincarnation of ancestor Liu, Hong Shixiang, he would have died of an illness long ago. As for the remaining 3, even if Su Weisheng was not the biological daughter of Su Xiao and Wu Su, most of them did not have any enviable results. Tantai Pingjing entered Beiliang because she vaguely saw traces of the one. She wanted to see with her own eyes how the young king of Beiliang turned the tide, how he changed the fate of the siblings and even blessed their descendants. This kind of action was even more difficult than slaughtering the flood dragon with human strength. Tantai Pingjing sighed softly. Su Longxiang had also finished accumulating power. With him as the center, the surrounding sand and stones were blown away. If it were ordinary people, they would only see the momentum of the second son of the butcher. But in the eyes of Tantai Pingjing, who had hundreds of years of experience, it was the appearance of a python that almost became a dragon. It was born irritable and barbaric. When Tantai Pingjing was in the prime of her life, she inadvertently bestowed the title of a white snake. Bestowing the title was a relatively obscure Taoist term. It was one level lower than the legendary celestial being God. Ordinary people might not know what the emperor's words were. The emperor's words contained the heaven's constitution and the prophecy of the Taoist immortal, but most of them had heard that monks didn't lie. They were used to nagging children after they said something wrong and let the children spit a few times to show that they took back their rude words. This was why the words created by the sages made ghosts and gods cry. After the words were spoken, it was also unpredictable and mysterious. Tantai Pingjing did not think much at that time. She just felt close to the white snake with a tail of more than 100 feet. She prayed for the white snake to become a dragon. The huge white snake as thick as a water tank actually shed tears like a human. Then, it instantly shed its snake skin for the 8th time without stagnation or any pain. Her head had a flood dragon horn. Tantai Pingjing, who was just an ordinary chi cultivator, just casually bestowed the white snake with a casual title, which made the white snake become a dragon in one step. After the white flood dragon jumped into the river, it stretched out its tongue and wiped Tantai Pingjing's arm. Then, it reluctantly jumped into the river in the surging wind and clouds. Her master heard the news and came over. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He only sighed that fools had fools' luck. Later, Tantai Pingjing knew that the spiritual creatures in the world, especially the big snake, even the Taoist master of Dragon Tiger Mountain, who was the feather-robed Taoist master, only dared to proceed step by step and bestowed the title of Flood Dragon. He dared not to overestimate himself and mention the body of a real dragon. Tantai Pingjing's action was tantamount to tying the merits of several generations to the white snake. The two were closely related. If the white snake finally became a dragon and ascended, she could get a great opportunity through reincarnation. But if the white snake failed, then Tantai Pingjing would share the trials and tribulations with it and would never be reincarnated. Even all the people close to her would be stained with evil karma. Fortunately, Tantai Pingjing's master was very optimistic about the white snake. Otherwise, once they had an evil relationship, no matter how much he valued Tantai Pingjing, he would expel this disciple from the sect to avoid a monstrous disaster that would bring disaster to the sect. Fortunately, Tantai Pingjing's master was very optimistic about the white snake. Otherwise, once they had an evil relationship, no matter how much he valued Tantai Pingjing, he would expel this disciple from the sect in order to avoid a monstrous disaster that would bring disaster to the sect. Fortunately, Tantai Pingjing's master was very optimistic about the white snake. Otherwise, once they had an evil relationship, no matter how much he valued Tantai Pingjing, he would expel this disciple from the sect to avoid a monstrous disaster. After that, perhaps only the young leader of Wudong, Li Yufu, would have such a good opportunity. At that time, a carp jumped out of the river into his arms on the bank of Guangling River, and this Taoist sat down holding the carp. "I'm Li Yufu, you and I are fated. If everything in the world can really cultivate. You and I work together to cultivate the great Tao. I only hope to see you again in a few hundred years." However, the world only knew that the Wudong leader suppressed the evil dragon of Earth Long Mountain, and did not know such a secret. Facing the aggressive Su Longxiang, Tantai Pingjing somehow showed a trace of absent-mindedness for the first time. Even the young disciples of Guanyin sect, who were 2 or 3 generations younger than her, noticed it. This tall woman, who had already reached the realm of returning to her original state but deliberately kept her appearance in her 30s, suddenly felt a little sad. She thought of her master, the man who was always difficult to look up to. When they stood together in the past, she was always taller than her master. When her master wanted to talk to her, he had to raise his head. Every time at that time, her master, who was omniscient and omnipotent in her impression, would feel a little helpless. Before her master disappeared without a trace and left her, he had a catchphrase, "You silly big guy." Back then, after her master had passed away, she had deduced from a few words from an elderly elder that her master was probably a lucky person who had seen through the mysteries of heaven several times. When luck was up, he would live, and when luck was down, he would leave. However, Tantai Pingjing did not deliberately guess which secret figure in history he was, let alone dare to deduce. This was also a taboo for venerables. At the moment, Su Longxiang's stray collision interrupted the reverie of the training Qi master, which made Tantai Pingjing angry for no reason. This was something that even Xia Feiyu, a Confucian scholar in Sichuan, could not do. Tantai Pingjing quickly raised her hand and lifted the mirror that even the founder of Guanyin sect did not know the exact origin. She wanted to teach this young man a lesson. A woman's mind was like a needle at the bottom of the sea. Even Tantai Pingjing, who was equal to an immortal, could not escape from the stereotype. At this moment, a cold voice sounded in everyone's ears. "Wang Man, or fighting with you Qi trainers is almost the same as civil officials and military generals who insist on comparing merits. It's boring. The next moment, a figure rushed through the moon-well sky mirror before Su Longxiang and walked to Tantai Pingjing. When he broke the mirror, there was no ripple on the moon-well sky mirror. But after passing through the mirror, the water ripples jumped happily. It was like an old object meeting an old owner. The mirror was not like a mirror, but like the broken moon in the well. Su Fengnian came to the front of the unusually tall Guanyin sect master. He had to raise his head slightly to look at her at the same level. He smiled politely and then turned to Huang Man. He rubbed his head. The young man, who was still manic and restless, immediately calmed down. Tantai Pingjing looked at the back of the young man, her lips trembling slightly. She said the two words, but they were silent. Chapter 1199. If it was said that the Guanyin sect did not take Su Longxiang seriously, but after Su Fengnian personally came here, the atmosphere clearly showed signs of leaning towards the local tyrant. Fortunately, Su Fengnian did not use his power to bully others. Instead, he took the initiative to walk towards the old woman that he had met once outside Yuyan Mountain Villa. He greeted her amiably and even jokingly said to Mei Yingyi, who had fought well on the lake, "This fairy sister, your finger sword technique has benefited this king greatly." Later on, when he fought with others, he secretly learned it and put it to great use. I hope fairy sister does not mind. Mei Yingyi lived up to her manly name. Facing this powerful vassal king who had stirred up the Jianghu in the imperial court, she did not have stage fright. However, her smooth and creamy cheeks still had the redness of a beautiful woman. Her voice was soft but not seductive. She jokingly said, "It is Mei Yingyi's honor to be able to enter the king's discerning eyes with my insignificant skill. However, I have a bold request. That is, if the king has the opportunity to fight with others in the future, before you use the upper finger sword technique, you must first say that this is the unique skill of Mei Yingyi of the Guanyin sect of the South Sea." Su Fengnian could not help but laugh. This is possible. To be honest, this king had half a master before, the sword Jiu Wang. You should have heard of this before. At that time, this king had not yet learned martial arts and the blade. He thought that when he went to Jianghu and fought with others, no matter what, as long as he could make the name of this king appear, then this king would be able to brag and flatter to various heroines. Therefore, this king and fairy sister are the same kind of people. Can we be considered as heroes who appreciate each other? Mei Yingyi covered her mouth and smiled. She did not enthusiastically agree with anything. Instead, she carefully controlled the situation and did not dare to climb up the pole. If she really thought that these big shots who held authority were merciful bodhisattvas, it was hard to fathom a ruler's heart. Accompanying a ruler was like accompanying a tiger. She was just a small character. Maybe one day she would be eaten until not even her bones were left, and they would still complain that it was not enough. However, Mei Yingyi was overjoyed to have the king of Beiliang address her as sister fairy. She didn't try to hide the joy on her face. Su Fengnian turned his head and looked at a certain young Qi refinement warrior who was sneakily hiding behind his senior brother. He smiled and said, "Why? Can't you recognize this king who has changed his hair color? Back then, you were very arrogant. Once you saw this king, you would casually sit on the river." The young man's face turned red. He walked out from behind his fellow disciples and bitterly said, "To be able to exchange blows with Wang Ye, I have no regrets in this life. Even if Wang Ye wants to beat or kill me today, I, Su Qingxing, will not complain at all. I won't dare to retaliate either." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Oh, you're from the same family. Then I really have no reason to fight with you. Now that you're in Lu province, don't treat yourself as an outsider. If you need any heavenly materials and earthly treasures that Beiliang has, feel free to ask. For the sake of our family, this king doesn't have the face to hide anything." The young man chuckled and said, "Then I won't treat you as an outsider. When the time comes, if Wang Ye is stingy, I, Su Qingxing, will run to the entrance of the Wangye residence and make a scene. Su Fengnian nodded and dismissed it with a smile. The girl who sold charcoal fiercely turned her head and rolled her eyes. She increasingly disliked this treacherous fellow who had a honeyed mouth and a sword in his heart. After that, Su Fengnian asked for a warhorse from the Dragon Elephant Cavalry and symbolically sent this batch of Qi cultivators from the South Sea for a period of time. Riding side by side with Tantai Pingjing, the sect master of the Guanyin sect, who had already completely recovered her calm state of mind, asked indifferently, "When will the Beimang army go south?" Su Fengnian also did not treat this as a military secret that could not be divulged. He said frankly, "Some small-scale battles will be very fast. At the beginning of the year, they were stunned by my younger brother's 10,000 Dragon Elephant Cavalry. The new king of the South Yard, Dongjua, and the Empress of Beimang should not be able to swallow this grievance. Even if they can, in order to appease the army, they urgently need a hearty victory to make a good start and get a good omen. However, as for which border of the three provinces in cool and flowing, Beimang is also not sure. They can only cope with all changes by remaining unchanged. Sect Master Tantai, you want to use this to accumulate merit. This king also needs you to give blessings to the fallen soldiers. I hope that both of us can." Tantai Pingjing smiled and continued the topic, "Happy business." Su Fengnian was stunned for a moment. This does not seem like something that would come out of the mouth of an otherworldly expert like Sect Master. What followed was a natural long silence. Their identities and ages were as different as heaven and earth. It was really difficult to find a topic to exchange pleasantries. Before leaving, Tantai Pingjing finally said something irrelevant. "My late master once set foot in the Jianghu of the Central Plains twice. The first time was to go to the demon-slaying platform of Dragon Tiger Mountain to discuss Taoism with Immortal Qi. The second time was to find the whereabouts of a white flood dragon. My late master once left behind a will. That white flood dragon was different from the common river boas. It did not follow the river into the sea but swam upstream. My late master only calculated that the white flood dragon swam to the gate of hell and then disappeared." Su Fengnian sat high on the horse without holding the reins. He folded his hands in his sleeves and said with a smile, "Sect Master Tantai, are you guessing that the white flood dragon sneaked all the way to Beiliang?" This king casually asked. "The common people worship the flood dragon as deities. But you Qi cultivators, especially Sect Master who has achieved the Tao, can hunt and kill the flood dragon. Why do you care about the whereabouts of a river flood dragon that has not yet turned into a dragon? Could it be that there is a reason behind this? If it does not involve the private affairs of the Guanyin sect, can you tell me something?" Tantai Pingjing shook her head and said in a stiff tone, "This has nothing to do with the situation in Beiliang. I have no comment." Su Fengnian did not force her nor was he interested in getting to the bottom of the matter. He just smiled and did not take it to heart. The 1,000 Dragon Elephant Cavalry under the direct command of Li Mo Fan did not continue to escort. Su Fengnian returned the warhorse to the ordinary cavalryman and sat behind his younger brother Su Longxiang who was his coachman. Obviously, his fellow soldiers were very envious of the guy whose warhorse was sat on by the young lord. The horseman also regarded it as a great honor and had a complacent look on his face. After the bearded lieutenant approached, he patted the horseman's head and scolded with a smile, "Motherfucker, you brat, don't be so sentimental and ask me for your military merit in the future." Although the cavalryman was not very old, he was a veteran of the Longxiang army. Last time, he had cut off the head of a northern barbarian. At that time, he only used it as the head of an ordinary Beimang cavalryman to calculate his military merit. Later on, from the news that spread from Beimang's southern court, he found out that the fellow was a member of the royal family with the surname of Yelu. Although he was only a branch of Yelu and could not be considered the purest descendant of the royal family, according to Beiliang's military law, he should at least be a lieutenant. This brave soldier was not convinced and ran to the bearded lieutenant every 2 to 3 days to ask for his military merit. In fact, everyone knew that being a lieutenant was secondary. The main reason was to take the opportunity to squeeze the wine out of the lieutenant who loved wine like his life. This time, when the prince wanted to borrow a horse, the lieutenant had a bright idea and gave this opportunity to that brat. He thought that he should let go of the few remaining jars of wine, right? Unexpectedly, the cavalryman glared at him and said, "Lieutenant, let me say this first. This is a different matter. If you dare to go back on your word, do you believe that this subordinate will not report this matter to the prince?" Report this matter to the prince? None of the soldiers around the cavalryman felt that there was anything wrong with his words. In our Bailiang, the king of Bailiang was the rightful emperor. He only lacked a dragon robe and a dragon throne. It was just that our prince did not care for those two things. The bearded lieutenant gritted his teeth and said, F***K, don't talk nonsense with this old man. Today, I'll make things clear to you, brat. When we go back, I'll give you an entire jar of wine. How about it? If you dare to take another sip of wine, this old man will strip you naked and hang you on the back of a horse. Then, we'll circle the camp a few times. The cavalryman grinned and said, "Deal." Hanging naked on the back of a horse and circling the camp was a punishment unique to the Longxiang army. As long as it was a native of the Dragon Elephant Cavalry, including the two vice-generals, Li Mofan and Zhang Lingbao, almost all of the rebellious fellows had had a taste of this before. A wily old fox who was so unlucky that he had died 8 times was proud of it. He always liked to say to the younger generation in the army that the taste was so memorable that it was even more satisfying than riding on the bed. Of course, there were not many who were willing to believe it. Li Mofan looked at the carriage and hesitated a bit. In the end, he had his personal soldiers pull back a bit. Su Fingnian turned around and lifted the curtain to look at the bright red talisman armor. It was hard to tell if it was in a standing or sitting position. When no one was wearing it, it was still half the height of a person. It stood alone in the carriage and emitted a bone-chilling aura. After Su Fingnian had collected 5 sets of talisman armor, he strictly ordered the 2 Mahist masters at the back of Mount Qingliang to forge a new set of talisman armor. This was to ensure that his younger brother, Huang Manor, would have something to rely on when charging and breaking through enemy lines in the future. At the same time, it was to forcibly imprison Su Longxiang's higher realm. Su Longxiang did not feel good every time he put on the talisman armor. It was no different from a kind of torture. However, as long as it was something his older brother, Su Fingnian, wanted him to do, he would never ask why. Back then, Su Xiao used both the carrot and the stick, but he was still unable to make his youngest son apprentice to the old celestial master Zhao Shituan and then go to Mount Longhu to learn martial arts. Su Fingnian returned after 3 years of traveling, and his simple sentence was all that was needed. Not to mention the imperial vassal Wang family, even between brothers of ordinary landowning households, there were all kinds of differences. If it wasn't a struggle for status, then it was a struggle for seniority. How could it be like the Bailiang Su family where brothers would go on blind dates? Chapter 1200. After Su Fingnian became the king of Bailiang, he first had to subdue the civil officials, pacify the border army, and fight against Wang Xianji. He never had a chance to talk to Huang Manor, or rather, he never knew how to talk to Huang Manor. After Huang Manor was enlightened, he calmed down and had his own ideas. After the expansion of the army, the Longxiang army, which had 30,000 soldiers and horses, was well managed by the youth. However, Su Fingnian was used to treating Huang Manor as the child with 2 snots. When Huang Manor grew up, he felt a sense of unfamiliarity that he didn't know how to talk to him. Occasionally, Su Fingnian would remember that Su Xiao probably had the same problem when facing his rebellious self. Of course, when Su Fingnian was the same age as Huang Manor, he was truly a lawless demon king. Su Xiao definitely didn't dare to scold him and didn't know how to persuade him. Although after the Wangfei passed away, as the general, he was both a father and mother, in the end, he was still a rough man. Leading troops to war and governing the army didn't make sense, so he just fought until they were convinced. However, when it came to the eldest son, how could he be so carefree? Su Fengnian looked at the yellow sand that was even more barren and barren than Liangzhou. He smiled and asked softly, "Huang Manor, did you miss your father?" With his back to his brother, Su Longxiang nodded vigorously. Su Fengnian continued, "Speaking of our mother's early death, outsiders all say that it was to give birth to you, the result of exchanging a life for a life. In reality, logically speaking, mother's lifeline was left behind by the white clothes case. If Su Xiao didn't have me, the eldest son, or us two sons, he would definitely be able to live out the rest of his life as a king with a different surname. After death, his posthumous title would be extremely honorable, and he definitely wouldn't be that bullshit Wu Li. So, you, the younger brother, would never be the one to say sorry to our parents. I also know that Su Xiao has always been biased. You and my two sisters are not as good as me." Su Longxiang held the reins and didn't say anything. Su Fengnian leaned against the wall of the carriage and looked at the sky that was higher and wider than anywhere else in Liyang. He said softly, "Su Xiao is actually very good to us, to the point that he can't be any better, except for my two sisters. I am the older brother and you are the younger brother, so it's different. But this isn't because Su Xiao is really biased. He doesn't feel sorry for you and your two sisters. But he was a boor who joined the army to kill enemies at the age of 14. How could he know the difficulties of his children as a father? After Su Xiao left, in order to deal with Wang Xianji, I went into an out-of-body state. That was how I saw Su Xiao when he was young, not as impressive as he was after he went to Beiliang. I saw Su Xiao standing outside the Grand Council office without bending his back or crippling his legs. It rained for an entire night, but those powerful officials closed their doors and refused to see him. They refused to give a single soldier a mouthful of food. Su Xiao stood like that for an entire night. After winning a battle, Su Xiao sneaked to the battlefield where the corpses of the soldiers did not have time to be dragged away. He squatted there and whimpered. It was not at all like after he had us. He said that he would be unstoppable wherever he pointed his troops, and he would be like a tiger swallowing tens of thousands of miles. I also saw Su Xiao's downfall after he became a general. He had to share hard buns with Master, Zhao Chongling and the others. Su Fengnian smiled and looked up at the clean sky with narrowed eyes. To be honest, our father can only be less tired when he's gone. If it weren't for the fact that he's worried about us, he would have gone down to accompany Mother long ago. He's just holding on with a strong will and fighting with the King of Hell. Su Fengnian straightened and looked away. He said in a deep voice, "People in Beiliang have said for a long time that the Zhao court is making things difficult everywhere. Su Xiao has military power. Why did he not just rebel? Beimang has Beiliang's 300,000 cavalry. They are bound to take over the Central Plains. The history books are just servant girls that the founding dynasty can paint as they please. How can the Su family's reputation be lacking? Su Xiao didn't tell us why. I also thought about this problem that wasn't a problem. I felt that there was no reason to talk about it. If Su Xiao wasn't such a person, he wouldn't have been able to reach northern Liang. Just like how Su Xiao treated me and you, Huang Man, there is no reason. He is the father, we are his sons. He feels heartache. It is that simple." Su Fengnian unconsciously pulled up his sleeves out of habit. He said, "As sons, we have to make sure that Su Xiao, as a father, doesn't get scolded by the future generations. It's just as simple. I, Su Fengnian, am guarding the Northwest. It is a responsibility that Su Xiao gave me. It is my duty. It is even simpler. As his older brother, I don't want my younger brother to die on the battlefield. At the very least, I don't want you to die before me. There is no reason to talk about this. Huang Man, did you hear that? If you dare to ask me to retrieve your corpse from the battlefield, you can forget about being my younger brother in your next life. Who doesn't have selfish motives? Even Su Shao said that according to reason, no one in the world has any relatives, and no one's son should die. But he can't do it either. It is the same for me. Su Fengnian said calmly, when the war starts, many people will die. Perhaps it will be second brother Yuan, Yan Wenluan, or even Lu Qiu, But I still hope that we can die further north. Chapter 1201. Su Fengnian suddenly laughed. Who knows, maybe we can even take down Beimang in one go, right? Your brother, such a dissolute disciple, can become number one in the world. Even if he was only number one for a short period of time, he was still number one in the world. In the future, what difficulties will there be in the world? Su Longxiang turned his head and smiled foolishly. After the carriage had traveled a few li, Su Longxiang suddenly turned his head again. Then the youth blinked his eyes. Su Fengnian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You want to ask me if I miss women? Of course I do. How could I not? I've always missed them. At first, I was worried about the forbidden meat given by the Wudang sect leader, so I could only endure it. When I couldn't endure it anymore, I had to endure it again. It was really miserable. In the end, I only found out later that I could eat meat. The only thing I have complaints about the sect leader is this. Old Jinren, you should have said so earlier. But after returning from Beimang, one thing followed another. I can't care about it anymore. My thoughts aren't as heavy as before. I'll just leave it to fate. Huang Manor, let me ask you something. Between the two sisters-in-law, which one do you favor more? Su Longxiang smacked his lips and laughed mischievously. Su Fengnian immediately understood. It was the Lu family woman who knew how to make chongyang cakes, and not the world-renowned female writer. Su Longxiang suddenly jumped off the carriage. He bent slightly and turned his head to look at Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian was stunned. He jumped onto Huang Manor's back. Su Longxiang shouted, "Fly," just like when he was a child. He carried his brother and ran wildly. This made Li Mo Fan's 1,000 Dragon Elephant Cavalry dumbstruck. But almost all of them had the same idea: we'll go to the border to kill the enemy, just like Commander Su, leaving our backs to his older brother, the king of Beiliang, and just like the old soldiers of the Su family, the Beiliang cavalry can rest assured and leave their backs to great General Su Shao. This is the reason why the Beiliang cavalry is so powerful. This was something that was imprinted in his bones, and there was no reason to talk about it. Moreover, who said that the young king of Beiliang was not as good as the villain Chen Jibao? The bearded lieutenant turned his head to look at the young rider who had been grinning from ear to ear all the way. He urged his horse to come to Li Mofan's side and said softly, "General, I don't know what loyalty and righteousness are. Those are all words that scholars like to say, but I think..." Li Mofan interrupted his subordinate's words. He raised his horsewhip and pointed at the two brothers in front of him. He said in a low voice, "What, you want to show your loyalty? Well, the commander and the king are in front. Go tell them yourself. In any case, I don't like scholars like you, and I don't like people who use their mouths to fart. A few years ago, you were one of the people who said that they wanted to go home and buy a big house so that they could enjoy their wives." The lieutenant's skin was dark, and his face was not red. He pulled up the corners of his mouth and muttered, "At that time, I didn't have any confidence. Who would dare to put their lives in the hands of an unreliable leader? I, Qian Wu, am just a normal person." The lieutenant's voice became softer and softer. In the end, it was almost inaudible. Li Mofan did not look at this subordinate who had gone through fire and water with him for many years. He said calmly, "I don't care what happened in the past. Even if you deserted and went back to enjoy life, that is what you deserve. I, old Li, will not look down on you. But in the future, don't even think about sitting at the same table as me, drinking and eating meat. I, Li Mofin, cannot afford to lose face. The lieutenant raised his head and laughed shamelessly. General, your words are really hurtful. Qian Wu's little heart is thumping. It really hurts his heart and lungs. Without a few bowls of good wine, it really can't be cured. Li Mofan finally had a smile on his face as he muttered, Mother Ker, having a soldier like you is already very embarrassing. Qian Wu said with a heartless and mischievous smile, isn't it because of you, General? You have no one to blame but yourself. Li Mofan shouted, Fan Shilong, return to the camp and hang Qian Wu on the back of the horse. Qian Wu's eyes widened. He raised his voice and asked, what? Not far away, a lieutenant laughed and said, Roger that. Qian Wu didn't dare to make irresponsible remarks to Deputy General Li Mofan. He turned his head and shouted at the bastard who was gloating, son of a bitch Fan, your daughter can forget about marrying into my house. I'll be your mother's in-law. Fan Shilong didn't care. He rubbed his ears and said lazily, our daughter is so pretty, why worry about marriage? If your son didn't read a few books and made our daughter obsessed with him, she wouldn't marry anyone but him. Otherwise, even if you money grubber knelt in front of the door for 3 days and 3 nights, I wouldn't even give you half a word. The Longxiang army nearby roared with laughter. Qian Wu cursed in anger and said angrily, those who laughed will be hung on the back of the horse with me. Let's see whose bird is bigger. If it's bigger than mine, I'll hang it one more time. Some brave cavalry immediately laughed and said, Lieutenant Qian, then we'll have to circle the camp many times. Qian Wu turned his head and said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, you bastards are good. When the time comes, pick the biggest bird. I'll chop it up and make it into a dish. There was a lot of howling. Li Mofan listened to the flirting between his subordinates and theirs. He wanted to keep a straight face, but he couldn't help but smile brightly. He didn't dare to say that all of the Beiliang frontier army could kill the northern barbarians until they cried for their parents, but the disciples of the Longxiang army under his command could casually take out 1,000 of his direct subordinates. Even if they faced 3,000 Beimang cavalry, it would still be child's play. That damn Liang imperial court, that bunch of officials from the 6 departments of Great Peace City to the prefectures and counties, how many years have they been saying that the Beiliang army is just an empty name? Li Mofan stopped smiling. His face was dark, and his eyes were burning. He said darkly, this time, the one who killed the most captains of the enemy, no one can take it from me. At the same time, the Wu family cavalry had entered River Province and was close to the Beiliang border. Chapter 1202. A shocking piece of news had swallowed up another piece of news that was already shocking. The latter was written by Deputy Administrator Song Dongming, who was called illegitimate outside of Beiliang. He submitted a memorial to Great Peace City, which shook the court of Liang. Su Fengnian, the king of Beiliang, actually requested to send troops to pacify Guangling Dao when Beimang's army was clearly pressuring the border. There were many people who speculated that Beiliang was finally going to rebel. Perhaps they had already received the personal promise of the Empress of Beimang. Pacifying Guangling Dao was just an excuse to invite the wolf into the house. The new king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian, had such evil intentions. But soon, another piece of news that had nothing to do with the political situation but was even more interesting for the officials and the common people to chew on began to spread. It quickly spread all over the country, especially in the capital. The level of enthusiasm was no less than when Wang Xianji left Martial Emperor City and when Qi Yanglong entered Great Peace City. The sword tomb of the Wu family, which had always been focused on swordsmanship, not only did someone openly leave the sacred place of death in the hearts of countless outstanding swordsmen for hundreds of years, but also sent out nearly 100 people in one go. The sword tomb of the Wu family was a place of death because if the swordsmen of the world wanted to truly make a name for themselves, they had to go through the Wu family and compete with the Wu family or their sword slaves. Only those who could walk out of the sword tomb with a famous sword from the sword tomb could be considered accomplished in swordsmanship. Even the previous leader of the Dongyue sword pool, Song Nianqing, lost to Wang Xianji in his youth and caused the reputation of the Dongyue sword pool to plummet. The real opportunity for the Dongyue sword pool to return to the pinnacle of the martial arts world was when Song Nianqing went to the sword tomb in his prime and returned safely. Even if he did not pull out a famous sword from the sword tomb, he still helped the Dongyue sword pool rise again. Although there were people close to the sword pool who often said that Song Nianqing's return meant that his swordsmanship was better than the Wu family's, most people only treated it as a joke. Song Nianqing had never said such words in the latter half of his life. The Wu family had been famous for 800 years and could be traced back to the Great Qin dynasty. After that, there were several great dynasties that sought to dominate the Central Plains. For example, the number one swordsman from 600 years ago was the Wu family's sword crown, Wu Chang, who had dominated the martial arts world at the age of 31. The number one swordsman at the founding of the Great Feng dynasty was still the leader of the Wu family, Wu He. It was rumored that on his deathbed, he laughed and said, "I've waited for 60 years, but there is still no sword in the world." It was enough to show his pride and confidence. Therefore, no one in the martial arts world could deny the fact that no matter how many swordsmen there were in the world, there were only two sword forests. One was the Wu family, and the other was for all swordsmen outside of the Wu family. There were sword geniuses who were famous in every generation of the martial arts world. Every 100 years, there would be countless new talents of the martial arts world and experts who believed that their swordsmanship was unparalleled in the martial arts world who would go to the Wu family to prove themselves. They wanted to prove that the Wu family's swordsmanship was inferior to the world's swordsmanship. However, except for a very small number of swordsmen who succeeded in their swordsmanship and retired, the vast majority would remain in the sword mound as slaves of the Wu family for the rest of their lives, practicing the legendary sitting sword technique and withered sword technique. After the Wu family set down this extremely unreasonable and harsh rule, only a few people left the sword mound, and all of them were top-notch swordsmen who had made a name for themselves when they returned to the martial arts world. As a result, the Wu family's sword mound was said to be a land of death for swordsmen. However, it was normal for the Wu family to become the holy land in the eyes of all the swordsmen in the world. The Wu family had passed down their legacies and collected their treasures. Their famous swords had already been piled up into mountains, and they had countless rare and unique sword manuals that had long been lost. If they could retrieve any sword or manual, not only would they be able to benefit from it for the rest of their lives, entering and exiting the sword mound was also a shortcut for a swordsman to climb to the top of the sword forest overnight. 200 years ago, the Wu family had defeated 10,000 cavalry with 9 swords, greatly damaging the vitality of the sword mound. Most importantly, it had forcefully severed many of their lineages, causing the Wu family to still be unable to fully recover. However, in the recent 100 years, 2 generations of swordsmen, Li Chungang, had gone to the Wu family's sword mound and obtained the wooden bowl. Dong Tai had even come from the Wu family and was half a member of the Wu family. In the end, the truth could not be contained. Even though the imperial court and the local officials along the way wanted to suppress the news, the sensational truth of the Wu family's 100 cavalry and 100 swords leaving the sword mound still slowly began to surface. The news grew more and more intense. More and more well-informed people of the martial arts world began to count people, counting just which senior swordsmen had been unlucky enough to become slaves of the Wu family in the past 100 years and which swordsmen still had hope of being able to make it out of the sword mound this time. Along the way, the swords used by those swordsmen and the unique skills they had all became the most interesting topics of the imperial court. 6 years ago, Zhang Wantai had risen to fame in Liaodong and was known as the best left-handed swordsman in the world. He was an expert who had withstood 100 moves from the old Minister of War and the new pillar of the country, Gu Jiantang. After going to the sword mound of the Wu family, there had been no news of him. This time, he might be able to see the light of day again. 10 years ago, Lu Jianji, who had competed with Qi Jiajie for the title of the best swordsman in the capital, was definitely among them. 18 years ago, the famous young master of the apricot sword furnace in Gangnam-do, Yu Shuowu, was also an important person who had gone to the sword mound to ask for swords but had disappeared without a trace. 27 years ago, Xia Qinggan, who had been nicknamed Han Banjian, after losing to the sword emperor of Shishu by only half a sword by a hair's breadth, was also very likely to go to Liangzhou with a sword on his back. More than 30 years ago, there was Cui Mei, who had the two reputations of Bodhisattva sword and sword monk. Before he shaved his head and became a monk, he was once a prodigy of the Cui family in Qinghe. More than 40 years ago, Gongsun Shuxue, who came from a humble family in the southern Tang Empire, was not only the best swordsman in the southern Tang Empire, but also the best swordsman in the southern Tang Empire. Although he did not have a famous nickname, Gongsun Shuxue's domineering swordsmanship was praised by many Jianghu veterans. This person's reason for going to the sword mound of the Wu family was also very interesting. I, Gongsun Shuxue, was born at the wrong time. Since I could not see Li Chuangang's true face, I went to the place where Li Chungang had walked before. As a result, something happened and I could not leave the sword mound of the Wu family. At that time, the emperor of the southern Tang Empire had personally written a letter to the Wu family in a very respectful manner. Unexpectedly, the Wu family still did not pay any attention to this human emperor. Counting further back, there were naturally many famous swordsman talents. However, in today's Jianghu, there was no way for them to appear in the world alive. After all, those who were arrogant enough to go to the Wu family to ask for a sword were already quite old. Otherwise, they would not have dared to go to the Wu family. Even if they were 30 years old, they should be 70 or 70 years old now. Between Zhang Wantai and Gongsun Shuxue, who were the most talked about, there were also 6 or 7 female swordsmen who were mentioned a lot. Perhaps their swordsmanship was not as good as these two, Lu Jian, Xia Qinghan, and the others. However, before these female swordsmen entered the Wu family, which was as deep as the ocean, they were all favored in Jianghu. They were all once the young Jianghu men of every generation admired them for a long time. Who knew how many Jianghu men were willing to kneel under their skirts? Of the 6 or 7 women, the last one, the literary sword, Nailan Huayu, who had unfortunately entered the Wu family's sword catacomb, was the most imaginative. After all, it was not too long ago, and she was a woman who had made it onto the rankings and won the Rouge rankings twice in a row. Even now, many of the Jianghu masters who had made a name for themselves would smile when they talked about this outstanding swordswoman. Then, they would smile to their juniors and say something about the same thing. Somewhere in Goddess Nailan's territory, there is a perfect combination of movement and stillness. The scenery is beautiful. If these martial arts masters had their wives by their side, most of them would glare resentfully. From the Wu family's sword catacomb in the heart of the Central Plains to Beiliang, countless people raised their heads in anticipation, waiting bitterly, just to catch a glimpse of the 100 withered swordsmen of the sword catacomb gathered together. Even though the local government had received orders from the imperial court to prohibit officials of all ranks from participating, there were still many officials who took off their official robes and traveled on light carriages, choosing a good spot to quietly wait for the sight of the 100 riders crossing the border. However, many of the rumors were false, and the group of withered swordsmen naturally did not stop. The Wu family had dared to treat the emperors of previous dynasties coldly. Even in the peaceful Liang dynasty, when the emperor of the Zhao family invited the current head of the Wu family to leave the mountains and enter the capital, he was still treated with respect. This caused many people on the line to miss out on an opportunity, and they all beat their feet and stomped their chests, feeling regretful. If a normal person wanted to ride a carriage and ride a horse to catch up to this strangest group of riders in the world, it would be a fool's dream. Which of the 100 riders wasn't a top-notch expert in Jianghu? Even if a Jianghu expert could barely keep up, he would only dare to watch from afar, not dare to get close to disturb them. This was also the most breathtaking event in Jianghu. As long as one was in Jianghu, no matter if they were a true expert in their own province or someone who could beat someone with a brick and say they were a true Jianghu hero, everyone rushed like a flock of ducks. This was especially true for the young men and women who were new to the world. Those who had money would naturally spend a fortune to buy a famous steed with outstanding speed, or spend a large amount of money in exchange for accurate information, just to catch a glimpse of the withered swordsman. Those who were shy of money could only settle for the second best, and try their best to follow behind the backs of the Jianghu celebrities. However, there were indeed many lucky people who were fortunate enough to see this scene, and it would be unforgettable for the rest of their lives. Wuxia town, on the border of Beiliang's Yuzhou, was very lively. Many markets had opened at the last minute, and there was no place to sit in the restaurants and tea houses. The inns were even more packed. Many guests had racked their brains to come from Liangzhou and Lingzhou to join in on the fun, because there was exciting news from the neighboring Hezhou that the Wu family swordsmen were about to enter the border. As for which province or county, and who would be lucky enough to encounter them, everyone would have to depend on their own luck. Chapter 1203. In an unknown inn in Wuxia town, there was a young man and woman who looked like a master and servant. The man's appearance could be considered decent, but he didn't look like a child of a rich family. Otherwise, the servant girl wouldn't be blind with her eyes closed. She also didn't have any good looks, but she carried a sword on her back. It was probably a piece of junk that was casually made by a shoddy blacksmith and wasn't worth much money. The inn, from the shopkeeper to the waiters, didn't even look at them. They were all busy staring at those rich young masters and young ladies. These people with a bit of power and influence were the only ones who could afford to spend money. If it weren't for the group of old men from the Wu family's sword tomb, who would be willing to stay in this and that didn't have anything to show. If it weren't for the young man's persuasion, the shopkeeper would have already kicked the master and servant out of the inn after paying the deposit. There were only a dozen or so rooms in the inn. Including the side rooms that were hurriedly cleaned up, there were less than 20 rooms. It was a matter of who would stay in the inn. The shopkeeper was kind and in the end, he endured the heartache and didn't kick the two poor fellows out of the inn. However, he wasn't willing to look at them. Every time he looked at them, it was like watching a few taels of silver slip away from his hands. It was too infuriating. Today, the young master and servant pair had already occupied the table by the window on the first floor of the inn. To put it bluntly, they were trash that occupied the toilet but didn't want to take a dump. They also didn't order any wine and only ordered hot tea that cost the least. The waiter's face was cold as he slammed the plate of food that came with the tea onto the table. His voice was not soft as he muttered to himself, "Tea, tea, it's tea every day. Our inn's guests who drink tea every day and don't drink wine are really unique." The young man in green robes pretended to be stupid and laughed. The servant girl with the broken sword on her back was probably blind and deaf. In any case, she was indifferent to anything that was said. After the waiter walked far away and went to a table of rich guests to serve them as if they were his ancestors, the young outsider curled his lips. After seeing so many people, I feel that when bushing is the most suitable. Sigh, I really don't understand this world. The woman sitting quietly across from him didn't say a word. If a woman with outstanding beauty was so demure, she could be seen as a lotus flower by men. Unfortunately, her appearance was ordinary, and in the eyes of others, she could only be seen as rigid and boring. The young man who shared the same table with her did not seem to find the woman in front of him boring. He said to himself, "Cui Hua, after we left home, we walked from the north to the south, and then from the southeast to the northwest. We have walked for more than 10,000 miles, but I have been eating that jar of pickled vegetables that you pickled every day. I really want to change my taste a little bit. Really, I just have that little thought." The woman with the vulgar name suggested in all seriousness, how about we make some pickled cabbage and pepper? The young man said bitterly, isn't that still pickled cabbage? But I can't eat spicy food. The woman thought carefully for a moment and asked, stewed meat with pickled vegetables. The young man swallowed his saliva and said awkwardly, it's good, but we can't afford meat. The woman gave a faint oh and didn't say anything else. This wasn't a problem that she wanted to think about, so she didn't think about it. She had always been like this. The young man didn't continue to dwell on this problem. It was a habit that had become second nature. In fact, he didn't get tired of eating pickled vegetables. It was just that she didn't like to talk. He just wanted to find an excuse for her to talk to him. Wu Luding felt that he would never get tired of eating pickled vegetables in his life. From the first day he saw her and ate her pickled vegetables, he never doubted this. After all, the pickled vegetables she pickled at that time weren't bad, but they were really hard to swallow. But after that, day after day, year after year, for more than 10 years, her culinary skills became better and better, and she became more and more skilled. In the eyes of Wu Luding, the current sword crown of the Wu family's sword tomb, there was nothing in the world that made him happier than this. Practicing the sword and being determined to become the best swordsman in the world was something that his family and parents wanted him to do. Since it was a responsibility that he had to bear, he didn't avoid it and worked very hard. But he liked to eat pickled vegetables, and that was his choice. These two things were not important or important. Sipping tea, Wu Luding asked, Cui Hua, can we really meet our family's uncles and aunts here? Cui Hua gently nodded. Wu Luding counted on his fingers and said to himself, Brother Zhang always likes to brag. This time, when we see him, we must stay far away from him. Otherwise, when he starts to nag, his spittle will fly everywhere. Uncle Yu always wants to steal the second half of the Dark North sword art from me. We don't pay attention to him, so as to avoid him completely going crazy. Aunt Naylan always liked to put her chest on my head when I was young. She also lied to me that it was because she was tired from walking. She was really heavy. Before we left home, she told me to look for a wife based on her appearance. Although I didn't have this idea, the two of us have walked for so long, and we really haven't met many who are better looking than Aunt Naylan. Of course, there are a few who have the same weight as her chest, but their figures are worlds apart from her. Cui Hua glanced at Wu Luding. There's sword energy. It's over, I probably won't be able to eat pickled vegetables for half a month. Wu Luding coughed and quickly changed the topic, there's also that Uncle Xia and Baldy Cui. They're not decent people either. One wants to recognize you as his daughter, and the other clearly doesn't like to eat pickled vegetables. Every time, they find a way to steal a few jars from you. Cui Hua, let's stay away from them. Wu Luding counted them one by one. When it comes to our neighbors, Zhou Lianqi and Xie Qinggan, I get angry. One has a strong evil spirit and wants to kill everyone in the world with a sword. The other seems to think that everyone in the world owes him millions of silver. I wonder why these two guys don't just kill each other. However, Aunt Chu and Grandpa Gongsun are both really good people. Just like you, they don't like to talk much. That Hellion sword maniac, who I gave the nickname of a Grandpa Sword Marriage, is neither a good person nor a bad person. I once asked the old ancestor about his origin, but the old ancestor didn't say. However, he should be a master who is hard to find in our family. The old ancestor's swordsmanship is only slightly better than him. As for talking about swordsmanship, the old ancestor is inferior to him. Anyway, my grandmother once said that the old man's understanding of swordsmanship, although I don't really understand it, should be able to surpass the current generation by 100 years. As for that demon with the surname Zhu, if it wasn't for his powerful swordsmanship, I wouldn't be willing to talk about him. I really don't know how such a treacherous person who is only in his early 40s could cultivate such a profound swordsmanship. It can make the old ancestor hate him but have to praise his swordsmanship. Wu Luding chattered and talked to himself. He quickly finished a pot of tea and shouted for the waiter to add hot water to the teapot. The waiter heard him but pretended not to hear. He leaned against the pillar and slacked off. His eyes were almost hanging on the chest of a young woman. Wu Luding could only give up after shouting twice. He looked at Zuehua and couldn't help but ask, "Tell me, releasing so many people this time, even granting amnesty to a demon like Demon Zhu and allowing them to fight for their lives at the border of Beiliang in exchange for a chance to completely leave the Wu family. Is the old ancestors' way of doing things right or wrong?" Zuehua was expressionless and didn't move. Wu Luding sighed and asked another question, "Zuehua, do you think these 100 or so swordsmen together can compare to the strength of the 9 old ancestors of the Wu family 200 years ago?" Zuehua finally opened her mouth to speak. "1 sword plus 1 sword doesn't equal the power of 2 swords. It's already amazing to have 1.5 swords. The 9 swords of the Wu family ancestors who rushed to Beimang at the great cost of having half of the people fall into certain death before the battle even started. Only then did they construct the sword formation recorded in an unknown ancient record. Its power was unparalleled. Even if the current world is led by the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai, Wang Xianji's eldest disciple Grumyu, Tai and cities Qi Jiaj, Tangxi's sword Saint Lu Baijie, and Longhu Mountain's Qi Xianxia, it's a total of 9 people. Even if their realms are much higher than the 9 ancestors of the Wu family, in terms of killing power against tens of thousands of cavalry, they may not be much higher." Chapter 1204. Wu Luding actually didn't take it to heart, but he was pleasantly surprised to hear Zuehua say this in one breath. Zuehua had obviously seen through his thoughts, and very quickly went back to her silent meditation. Wu Luding sighed, and rubbed the stubble on his chin with the palm of his hand. "Don't talk about the number 1 swordsman in the world, I'm afraid I can't even be considered in the top 5 right now. Even the top 10 is a bit uncertain. But the old ancestor has made such a big move, I'm too embarrassed to drag you up there. Zuehua, I'm very depressed right now." The last sentence was something that Wen Bushing, who shamelessly freeloaded on food and drinks in the small house in Great Peace City, often said often. In fact, Wu Luding missed the word crotch, but after Wu Luding followed suit, he couldn't eat pickled vegetables for 2 to 3 months. From then on, he only dared to say now and not crotch. Zuehua didn't want to talk, and Wu Luding also felt indescribably sad. For a moment, he, the sword crown of the Wu family without a sword, and the female sword attendant, who was carrying the Su of Gojoseon, on the other side of the table, both became silent. There were about 10 tables on the first floor, and they were all dressed in bright clothes and looked very rich. It was said that Beiliang was poor, but just like other places in Liang, there were actually quite a few rich people. The guests of these inns were all talking loudly without stopping until they shocked people to death, or they were pretending to be experts and talking nonsense. It wasn't that so-and-so beside them had once known so-and-so, and that so-and-so behind them was a great swordsman who had successfully entered the sword catacomb and retreated. It was just that their words were noisy, and everyone agreed with each other. There were also many people who were startled. In fact, everyone was well aware that if someone really knew a top Jianghu swordsman, who would be willing to stay and drink in this kind of inn. Even more so, no one would have thought that not far away, there was the sword crown of the Wu family, whose name had already shaken the north and south of the river, as well as the female sword attendant, who carried the second most famous sword in the world on her back and understood Li Chuangong's 2-sleeve green snake. Even if Wu Luding announced his identity and background, no one would be willing to believe him, nor would they dare to believe him. In the eyes of everyone present, if you were really Wu Luding, you wouldn't have the face to come out and mingle in Jianghu without more than a dozen experts to serve you tea, give you water, massage your shoulders, and massage your back. How could you even boast that you were the one and only sword crown in the world? Therefore, it must be fake. About 2 hours later, the entire Yunxia town was in an uproar. The 100 cavalry from the Wu family's sword tomb really passed by here. Zuehua stood up and reached out to her back, gently pressing down on the Su of Gojosian ancient sword. Originally, the Wu family cavalry was going to circle around the city according to the rules, but under the leadership of a leader surnamed Wu, they changed their minds at the last moment and made an exception to pass through the city. 100 riders entered the streets of Wuxia town. Only the sound of hooves could be heard. There was no noise at all. Every one of them had the same haggard look on their faces. The oldest had a head full of snow, and the youngest was a man and woman in their 40s. Everyone had a sword on their back, but only one sword. Without exception, no one had a sword on their back, nor did they have a sword sheath to hide it. If you break into my Wu family, your skills are not as good as mine, and you will be my Wu family's sword slave for the rest of your life. This was the rule set by Wu Zhang, who became the strongest person in the world at the age of 31. The Wu family's rule, for hundreds of years, had become the rule of all swordsmen in the world. In the shops on both sides of the main street of Wuxia town, no one dared to walk on the street. They only dared to stick their heads out of the windows and doors. Their eyes were full of surprise and awe, and almost everyone's forehead and palms were sweaty. The shop assistant didn't even have the time to look at the rich girl's full breasts and graceful figure. He didn't have the ability or status to squeeze to the door, so he could only move a chair inside the door and stand on it to watch. But this wasn't the most exaggerated. The most exaggerated were the people who nimbly climbed onto the trees and roofs. When they saw the Wu family's cavalry pass right under their noses, some were shocked by the name of the Wu family sword tomb, and some were cheering because they were rushing to Beiliang to help. But even more were stunned and didn't know what to do. When the group of one man, one sword, and one horse stopped for no reason in front of the inconspicuous inn, the people at the entrance were so frightened that they retreated in panic. Many of them fell to the ground and scrambled back into the inn with their hands and feet. As a result, Wu Luding and sword servant Chui Hua finally made way. When the shopkeeper and the shop assistant saw the second and third riders of the Wu family dismount and make way for the young master and servant, their minds were filled with paste and they were completely scared silly. The shop assistant who had been giving the master and servant a hard time these past few days fell to the ground with the stench of urine all over his body. Wu Luding sat on the horse that one of the Wu family's sword servants, Helian, dismounted and made way for him, while Chui Hua sat on the horse of an old woman that had been forgotten by Jiang Hu for many years. The two sword servants didn't have the slightest bit of resentment. As the group of horses continued to move forward, they silently followed beside the two riders. This was the rule of the Wu family. No matter what kind of strength or reputation you had before you entered the Wu family's sword tomb, your sword was inferior to mine. Even if you could wield a sword again in this life, it was up to the Wu family to decide. When the middle-aged man in the lead saw Wu Luding and Chui Hua, he didn't say a word. He turned his horse around and returned to the Wu family alone. Wu Luding turned his head and looked at the lonely back of his uncle, Wu Xian. He bit his lips and slowly turned his head, but also didn't say a word. The younger generation of the Wu family didn't care about children. They were only allowed to use the sword. Every generation, one sword crown would travel the Jianghu. If they didn't come out, they would be the best in the way of the sword. Otherwise, they wouldn't be allowed to return to the Wu family when they were alive, and they wouldn't be buried in the Wu family after they died. This was the rule set by another ancestor, Wu He. Ever since the Wu family's 9 swords defeated 10,000 riders, in the past 200 years, almost every Wu family disciple who had the qualifications to have one of the 9 words in their name were all outstanding sword embryos who had displayed astonishing talent since childhood. However, other than the 9 words that had never been used, none of the other 8 words were left out. But strangely, other than Wu Luding who had the 6 words in his name, Wu Xian, who had been defeated by Wu Su who later became the king of Beiliang's concubine. Thus, the sword that should have been known by the world was destined to be unknown for the rest of its life, just like its owner. And this time, the Wu family's sword tomb had sent out more than 100 riders. They also wanted him, the nephew who had replaced the Wu family's sword-seeking Jianghu, to be the only person in charge. No matter how outstanding Wu Wuxian's sword skills were, he could only be a flash in the pan of Jianghu and die of old age in the family. The Wu family was not only ruthless to those who broke into the sword tomb, but even more ruthless to their own family members. In the past 200 years, countless Wu family disciples had only wanted to take a look at Jianghu, but they had died under the swords of their fathers. Countless men and women had quietly committed suicide. Even more so, countless people had gone mad because of practicing the sword and had been insane for the rest of their lives. Wu Luding was very glad that he had been born in the Wu family, where he had lived and died for the sword. He had never complained, but he was even more glad that he had Cui Hua to accompany him on this trip to Jianghu. A Jianghu without Cui Hua and pickled cabbage could not be considered Jianghu. Just like a certain idiot who, in the end, still believed that as long as his brother Xiaoyan was still in Jianghu, he would still be in Jianghu. Wu Luding had always only recognized that idiot as his friend. He did not even give a damn about his royal highness. When he became the king of Beiliang and became the most powerful person in the world, Wu Luding, did not think much of it. This time, Wu Luding came to Beiliang because he wanted to ask in person. Su, do you still remember the ranger who only carried a wooden sword in his life? If you dare to forget. Yes, you, Su Fengnian, are powerful. Even Wang Xianji is not your opponent. I, Wu Luding, do not have the ability to chop you to death, but I can still take hundreds of riders and leave Beiliang on my own. However, as he was thinking about this matter, Wu Luding felt somewhat helpless as he rode through Yunxia town. Even if he had the sword crown, he most likely would not be able to take away these Wu family sword slaves. In the world, other than his own ancestor, no one else had the ability to do so. Not long after. At the border between Yu and Liang prefectures, there was a roadside wine shop at a fork in the road. The middle-aged lady boss used to be glared at by the greedy customers who passed by. This time, the situation had changed. She was the one who glared fiercely at the extraordinarily handsome young man. He sat there alone and ordered a jug of wine, but he asked for 2 cups. She said that she did not have wine cups. Her shop used big bowls. He smiled and said that bowls were fine too. The woman leaned on the table next to him and looked at the handsome man who was in a daze. She thought that he had probably remembered someone he wanted to drink with. Chapter 1205. The wine shop's business was getting better and better, and several tables were filled with customers. This made the proprietress smile from ear to ear. This was a rare sight in the past. As she shouted and served the wine and meat, she calculated in her heart that she had earned a few pieces of silver and a few copper coins today. She thought about her youngest child, who was studying in a private school, who was always clamoring to buy brushes and ink. How could the family afford this expense? Otherwise, which decent woman would be willing to show her face in public? Most would rather face the yellow earth and back to the sky. Now, she could finally fulfill that child's wish. The tables were full, but there were still people behind her asking for wine. Moreover, they had no intention of leaving immediately. The proprietress had no choice but to bring out a few stools. Fortunately, the men did not think it was unsightly and only cared about drinking and eating. If it were in the past, the men who settled down in the tavern would often look at the proprietress and tease her. Beiliang women were bold and unyielding, not inferior to men. As long as the men did not go overboard and pinch them when they delivered the wine, the proprietress would not get angry. However, today, the customers all glanced to the east of the post road as if they were waiting for someone. Not long after, more than 20 people had gathered in the tavern. As a result, the handsome young man who occupied a table was particularly eye-catching. In the beginning, no one wanted to share a table and drink, but for some reason, after seeing the young man's appearance and temperament, they all subconsciously avoided him. Now, the proprietress saw that more and more customers were coming, and there were even more rich people dressed in silk. She was a bit worried about the young man. What kind of place was Bailiang? In other places, there was a saying that a disagreement would lead to a fight. Here, everyone had a violent temper that was like knives and sand. Perhaps one more glance would lead to a fight. The proprietress did not care that the young man made her lose a few pots of wine and a few pounds of meat, but she was afraid that he would get into trouble and suffer a loss. She would not be able to bear it if such a handsome young man was beaten black and blue. Just as the proprietress was about to squeeze out a smile and speak to the young man, she never thought that what she was afraid of would happen. A group of tall and sturdy men with sabers at their waists had set their eyes on the table with 3 empty seats. The proprietress was truly afraid that the young man did not know the dangers of the Jianghu. She was afraid that he would feel that he had lost face and would open his mouth to hurt her. At that time, sabers and swords had no eyes. So what if he had some family background to rely on? After so many years in Bailiang, when had there not been a year where she had not heard of a few scholars being beaten half to death? In Bailiang, unlike other places in Liang, it was not easy to wear scholarly robes. Only a young man with a cold saber could intimidate the people of the Jianghu. However, the proprietress had also heard that it seemed that the young king of Bailiang had issued an imperial edict. Nowadays, even the children of generals did not dare to privately wear cold sabers. It was even very rare to see someone riding a horse in the downtown area. The proprietress did not understand what it meant to worry about the country and the people. She only felt that the world in Bailiang was indeed better. The proprietress heaved a sigh of relief because although the young man looked young, he had a lot of Jianghu experience. He took the initiative to chat with the fierce-looking men for a while, and then smiled and asked for 10 caddies of green and wine from her. The 5 middle-aged men who did not look like they were in the business of making a living saw that the young man was tactful and had a few more smiles on their faces. Outside of Bailiang, as long as they were not the descendants of generals, not everyone would dare to draw their sabers and start a fight within Bailiang. Moreover, the descendants of generals were also divided into 3, 6, and 9 ranks. The height of their father's official hat and the number of soldiers they commanded determined whether they could act tyrannically within a county or a province. For the people of Bailiang's Jianghu, almost every one of them had suffered at the hands of the descendants of generals. Often, there would even be people who would be targeted for no reason and would find a lame excuse to kill them. Afterwards, when they reported to the authorities, it would be nothing more than a sentence of small fry using their skills to commit murder. As the descendants of the generals of the Bailiang cavalry, how could we bring shame to our family's reputation? We would naturally lend a helping hand when we see injustice on the road. When the officials forced the people to rebel, the people had no choice but to rebel. However, if they rebelled, they would die. Back then, in the 3 provinces of Bailiang under the rule of butchers, other than the Wudang Mountain, where the Immortals and Immortals cultivated, which was still considered a famous sect in the martial arts world, no one else could claim to be a big sect in Jianghu. Wasn't the reason why this was the case because they were all harmed by the numerous descendants of generals? Those Jianghu masters who were truly skilled in martial arts were all hired as watchdogs, and in turn, helped the evildoers to suppress the wanderers of Jianghu who did not have any backing. In Yuzhou, there was the Sun family who came from the same hometown as the spear fairy Wuxia. The children in the family were all proficient in the spear, but because they were unwilling to rely on the authorities and the descendants of generals, when the head of the family died, they were quickly exterminated by the enemies of a general. It was said that out of the family of more than 40 people, only 2 or 3 managed to escape. The proprietress, who had seen many customers coming and going, would occasionally think that it was not easy for people like her to make money by selling wine. Those who were in Jianghu usually looked heroic, but in fact, it was probably even harder for them. Looking in the direction of Yuzhou in the east, she saw a cloud of dust at the end of the posthouse road. The proprietress only glanced at it slightly. There were often cavalrymen of Bailiang passing by on the posthouse road, and she had already figured out the trick. It seemed that there were only about 100 of them, which was really nothing in Bailiang, which was rich in iron cavalry and big horses. The proprietress saw that everyone inside and outside the tavern, regardless of whether they were sitting on chairs or stools, stood up as if their butts were on fire. Their eyes were blazing with passion, and they were even more fascinated than when they saw a naked woman. This made the proprietress somewhat puzzled. Could it be that some big shot had graced them with his presence? She was just a rural woman who could only afford to sell green and wine. Whether it was in Jianghu or in the imperial court, there were many things that she did not take to heart even if she heard about them. As a woman who was content with counting a small pile of copper coins every day, how could she worry about the great cause of the country for the king of Bailiang? During this period of time, she had heard many customers talk about the Wu family's sword tomb, but she did not take it seriously. She stared fiercely at all the customers who left their seats, afraid that they would take the opportunity to run away with the money for the wine. After being busy for half a day, the proprietress could finally take a breather. She was in the mood to look at the young man who had ordered a lot of green and wine. She pursed her lips and smiled. Who said that only men were allowed to look at beauties? Women also like to look at handsome men. At this moment, the young man also stood up and stood under the shade of the big locust tree next to the tavern table by the courier road. His hands covered the cuffs of his sleeves. She looked at his side profile and envied him for having a pair of attractive eyes. Moreover, when he looked at her, he did not have the look of an ordinary man who wanted to eat her alive. His eyes were clean, just like the old well in the village. The water from the well was exceptionally clear all year round. It was good to drink a ladle of it to quench one's thirst or use it to make wine. The proprietress could not help but laugh out loud as she thought about it. She wondered which family's young woman was so lucky to be stared at by such a handsome young man every day. If it were her, she would be willing to eat less and save money to buy rouge and powder that she had never used to apply on her face. The proprietress was right. There were indeed 100 riders coming from here to Liangzhou. However, even a woman like her, who did not know what Jianghu was, could see that the 100 riders were not ordinary. The riders were all people who used swords. They were not armored and carried crossbows like the cavalry of Bailiang, nor were they dressed in bright clothes like the retainers of important people. Everyone's face was as hard as stone. Many of the swordsmen looked to be in their 70s, but when they rode by, their waists were like erect military spears. Their spirit was not something that the old people in the village could have. Especially when the 100 riders looked at the tavern almost at the same time. Not only did the proprietress retreat in fear, but almost everyone else also retreated. However, for some reason, the more than 100 swordsmen did not stop after the leading rider urged his horse forward without looking sideways. The proprietress was relieved. It was good that they did not stop. Otherwise, she would not dare to charge them for the wine. The young vassal king, who was deliberately ignored by the 100 riders of the Wu family, put down his arm. In the end, he did not say anything. It was inevitable that he felt a little embarrassed. Of course, Su Fengnian knew more than anyone else present. Wu Luding, who was in the lead, intentionally turned a blind eye to Su Fengnian, and the sword slaves behind him could only continue forward with sword crown. Su Fengnian did not get angry. He sat down and asked the proprietress for half a caddy of green and wine. Anyway, he had shown his sincerity. It did not matter if the leader of the 100 riders of the Wu family did not appreciate it, but he could not put his hot face on a cold butt, right? If it were not for the sake of the Wu family's great-grandfather, whom he had just met, he would not have waited at the border of Liangzhou. Since Wu Luding wanted to put on airs, then let him. Su Fengnian would not make things difficult for him. Su Fengnian calmly drank the wine. In his mind, he was weighing the strength of the 100 riders of the Wu family. Wu Luding and the 6 or 7 people behind the second rider, Cui Hua, could all be considered top-notch experts. If the battle was in a stalemate, and victory or defeat was only a hair's breadth away. Who could stop these 100 riders and 100 swordsmen? There was no need to consider Tuoba. As long as the martial god of Beimang was on the battlefield, he did not need anyone to protect him. Hong Jingyan should be able to handle it, and Murong Baoding would probably not be able to handle it. However, in a battle between two armies, the legend of taking the head of a general in the midst of an army of 10,000 was very rare in the spring and autumn period. Especially with the appearance of several types of large crossbows that were easy to assemble and astonishingly powerful, it was very difficult for someone to achieve the feat of breaking through a battle formation or even entering and exiting a few times. It should be known that a fish-duck treading crossbow, which was made by the joint efforts of several elite soldiers, was so powerful that it was known as the 50 Flying Swords, in Jianghu. That was because within the range of 500 feet before the fish-duck treading crossbow's power had decreased, a single fish-duck treading crossbow was equivalent to a flying sword of a sword immortal. It was difficult to dodge, let alone face it head-on. If Wang Xianji had not broken Gao Shulu's physique. Su Fengnian thought of this and laughed at himself. There were no ifs in the world. Chapter 1206. Su Fengnian let out a sigh of relief. The people who had come to try their luck at the tavern had all come in high spirits after feasting their eyes. Many of them had even paid extra for the wine to the waitress when they were paying the bill. Soon, the tavern was completely emptied. Before those burly men with swords left, they didn't forget to bid farewell to Su Fengnian, who was treating them to wine. Su Fengnian continued to sit and drink his wine. Although he occasionally chatted with the woman about the harvest, he naturally didn't have any improper thoughts about the lady boss. The charming woman wasn't naive enough to think that this young man had any wild thoughts. She took advantage of the conversation. Since she didn't have any business to serve, she sat across the table from him. She carried a jar of green ant wine and a few plates of homemade dishes to go with the wine. She said that it was for him, but it didn't cost much. As the two of them chatted, 3 more guests finally arrived. 1 old man and 2 young men, all of them carrying bags and carrying wooden poles. They sat down at the table next to Su Fengnian's. They weren't from rich families. The old man only asked for half a caddy of green ant wine. The 2 young men could only smell the fragrance of the wine and watch the elder and their family drink with narrowed eyes. A burly young man with stubble on his chin asked in a low voice, "Grandpa, the swordsmen we saw just now, were they really the swordsmen from the Wu family sword tomb?" The old man nodded. The other young man with delicate features didn't look vulgar. His lips were red and his teeth were white. He looked like a woman. If he had met those young men who liked men a few years ago, he would have been better off dead. Fortunately, there were still many arrogant young men in the prisons of Beiliang. Compared to the Beiliang of the past, the Beiliang was much more disciplined. Moreover, many rich people had moved out of Beiliang. Today, with the addition of Lu Province's Beiliang, it was a rare peaceful world. After the lady boss greeted the 3 cash-strapped guests, she returned to her seat. She glanced at the delicate young man and subconsciously turned her head to look at the young man across the table. Yes, the young man in front of her was much more handsome. She didn't expect to be caught red-handed by the young man. The lady boss saw that he seemed a little helpless. She couldn't help but laugh. There was nothing to be embarrassed about. After all, she was a woman who would soon have a daughter-in-law. Her skin couldn't be that thin. The lady boss laughed straightforwardly. "Young master, you look even better than the prettiest girl in our village. Your parents must be good-looking as well. Young master, please don't be angry if I look at you a few more times." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Lady boss, if you want to look, then look. I can't control your eyes. But can you omit the small change when you pay the bill later?" The lady boss laughed and said, "How can I do that? I've already given you a jar of the best green ant wine. Later on, you can't miss a single copper coin." If young master can let me touch and pinch you a few times, I can consider it. Su Fengnian said helplessly, Lady Boss, your business is really profitable. The lady boss laughed heartily without hiding anything. Su Fengnian looked at her smiling face and laughed as well. Compared to the women who grew up in the misty rain in Jiangnan, the women of the northwest frontier fortress were naturally less gentle and graceful. However, they had more of a heroic spirit that could only be cultivated in this place. Su Fengnian liked the lady boss's smile. It was just like how he liked Beiliang. For Su Fengnian, who grew up in Beiliang, Liaodong, where his ancestral home was, could never be called home. The handsome young man next door listened to the conversation between Su Fengnian and the lady boss and furrowed his brows. The tall young man sneaked a glance at the lady boss's chest that had bumped against the edge of the table and swallowed. The old man sitting next to Su Fengnian had a calm expression. He held a wine bowl and closed his eyes to smell the wine before each sip. If one looked closely, the old man and the two young men had thick calluses between their thumb and forefinger. It was clear that they had touched many things. Su Fengnian had seen it long ago, but he didn't want to look into it. The poor practiced literature and the rich practiced martial arts. These three were clearly people who practiced the spear all year round. As for why they were so shabby, even the spear shafts they used to practice the shaking of the spear were the most coarse pewter ones. Who didn't have a difficult book that they didn't want to open? The handsome young man lowered his voice and gritted his teeth. Grandpa, I heard that the Sun family moved to the Central Plains. The devil surnamed he must have followed them. What should we do? The old man's eyes were complicated. He lowered his head and drank a mouthful of wine. He raised his head and said indifferently, practice your spear skills first. Even if he stands in front of you now and you two stab him 100 times, you won't be able to hurt him. The young man was stunned and tears welled up in his eyes. The strong young man whispered, why did I hear that he joined the fish dragon gang? He even became a leader. Compared to the Sun family, he is even more difficult to deal with. The old man glared at him and the strong young man immediately shut up. The handsome young man's eyes lit up and the old man immediately said in a deep voice, whether you go to the Central Plains or the Fish Dragon Gang, the most important thing for you is to practice your spear skills. As long as Grandpa is still alive, I will expel you from the family if you dare to seek revenge on him. The tall young man whispered, a month with a rod, a year with a saber, and a lifetime with a spear. With my talent, I won't be able to master the spear even in 10 lifetimes. The old man slammed his wine bowl and said angrily, nonsense. Wang Xiu practiced the spear for less than 40 years and was already one of the 4 grandmasters who was as famous as Old Sword Godly. A year with a saber. Gu Jiantang practiced for only a year and became the best saber user in the world. Our lord who succeeded Wang Xianji and became the best in the world. Speaking of this, the old man was suddenly speechless because he suddenly realized that the young lord didn't seem to have practiced the saber for many years. The tall young man snickered. Even the handsome young man was amused and the dense haze on his face faded a little. The old man shook his head and continued to drink. Grandpa, our cold saber, the curved saber of the northern barbarians, and the waist saber of the king of Yan's army in Nanjiang are known as the 3 famous sabers in the world. Can you tell me more about them? Practice your spear. No matter how good the saber is, it belongs to others. Even if you only have a wooden spear, it is still in your hands. The tall young man was very curious and full of dreams about the Jianghu of the Central Plains. He felt wronged and said, I won't lose anything by talking about it. The other young man from the north and the south was more well-behaved. He only asked, Grandpa, last time you said that our Beiliang army's spear technique is not suitable. Why is that? The tall young man laughed and said, Grandpa is just bragging. Our Beiliang army has Su Yanbing and Han Laoshan, the 2 immortal spear juniors. How can it be our grandpa's turn to make irresponsible remarks? The handsome young man said angrily, "What's wrong with our grandpa?" Wu Jinling, who was more powerful than Wang Xiu, even asked our grandpa about how to hold the spear when he just started practicing the spear. The tall young man made a face and said, "God knows if grandpa is just bragging." The old man didn't get angry. He drank and fell into deep thought. Finally, he came back to his senses and sighed softly. Let's not talk about Wu Jinling, who was considered the most talented in Beiliang back then. The immortal spear Wang Xiu, Su Yanbing, and Han Laozhan, the three juniors, in terms of spear technique, Grandpa was much weaker than them when he was young. In the future, the gap will only get bigger and bigger. There is nothing to be embarrassed about. However, you have to remember one thing. No matter what weapon is in the world, it is for people to use. Experts have their own way of using it, and ordinary martial artists have their own way of practicing it. Take Wu Jinling for example. He entered the martial grade at the age of 9, the second grade at the age of 12, and the Vajra at the age of 17. In his hands, the spear seemed to have been bestowed with supernatural powers. Even so, when he was 14, he still encountered a threshold. It was also at that time that Grandpa casually said a few words about how to hold the spear. After that, Wu Jinling was enlightened and started practicing the spear again. Unfortunately, the heavens are jealous of geniuses. Su Fingnian, who had been listening by the side, smiled and said, Wu Jinling's early death isn't necessarily because the heavens are jealous of geniuses. On the path of martial arts, it is not a good thing to be too smooth. In the Jianghu, there is a saying that there are mortal enemies. Often, two people who are at odds with each other can steadily climb up the martial arts realm. No matter how fast they are always advancing. It is probably because of the whetstone. If the immortal spear Wang Xiu didn't go to Beimang, he might not have become a grandmaster in the future. Moreover, I have also heard that in martial arts, it is taboo to be the head of a chicken rather than the tail of a phoenix. When practicing the saber, the sword, or the spear, after reaching a certain realm, there is no need to talk about the top 3 swordsmanship or the number 1 saber user in the world. Everyone is aiming to be the number 1 in the Jianghu. Otherwise, when Wang Xianji was in the martial emperor's city for 60 years, there wouldn't be so many people who went to humiliate themselves. The old man smiled and didn't say anything. As long as it was a martial arts aristocratic family, there would be no elders who wouldn't speak of such things. In the old man's opinion, even 100 of those famous teachers with undeserved reputation could not compare to a wise teacher. Moreover, at the old man's age, no matter how much ambition he had when he was young, it had long been worn away by the passing of years. Especially when he heard about the illusory number 1 or number 2 in the world, he was even less interested. However, out of courtesy, the old man still faced the arrogant young man and raised the wine bowl in his hand as a toast. The young man also raised his bowl and drank the wine in one gulp. The tall young man was a fearless newborn calf. When he saw that this young man had even heard of Wu Jinling, he was puzzled. After all, although Wu Jinling had been mentioned as often as spear immortal Wang Xiu in their hometown, few people in other parts of the northern Liang knew of this name because he had died at a young age and died in a disgraceful way of getting drunk on the streets. Moreover, it had been decades since then. The young man couldn't help but ask, "How do you know about Wu Jinling?" Su Fingnian smiled and said, "I heard it from a friend." The delicate young man was disgusted when he saw this guy flirting with the lady boss. He turned his head and stared blankly at the post house. Chapter 1207. Su Fingnian glanced at the 3 white ash rods of different lengths and suddenly said casually, "Old mister, of the 2 juniors, one should have changed his rod half a year ago. It should have been 3 inches longer, and the other one should have increased his weight by 6 ounces. The 2 youths were confused. The old man's eyes lit up, but quickly dimmed. He honestly said, "I don't have money." Su Fengnian nodded and said, "A single coin stumps a hero. Old mister, I still have some money left for wine. Would you like to drink another 2 caddies of wine?" Of course, the woman was happy for the customer to drink a few more bowls of wine, especially the handsome young man in front of her. Without waiting for the old man to answer, she eagerly went to pick up the wine. This gave the old man a way out. He probably believed that his vision, honed from years of wandering, trusted this young stranger. He cupped his fists and smiled, "Then this old man thanks you." Although the old man had gone through a lot, he still had a forthright temperament. He asked the tall young man to sit on a bench and invited Su Fengnian to sit on the seat beside him. The lady boss added some wine and meat. The plate was not big, but the amount was not enough. Fortunately, it was free of charge. Otherwise, she would be a spendthrift. The old man used his sleeve to wipe the wine and smiled. "This young master's vision is accurate, very accurate. Do you also practice the spear?" "Generally speaking, without 10 or 20 years of practice, you can't really see the depth of my 2 grandsons." Su Fengnian shook his head and smiled. "I don't practice the spear, but there are some people around me who are experts. After watching for a long time, I can understand a little." The old man joked, "If that's the case, then young master should be an expert." Su Fengnian also joked, "Probably a little high." The handsome youth coldly snorted, while the tall youth held back his laughter. He had never seen such a shameless person. The old man didn't take it to heart. When interacting with people, he wasn't afraid of those who showed their small flaws to others, but he was afraid of those who were scheming. The old man sighed and lamented, "Don't be fooled by how popular pewter spears are in the Liang army nowadays. In fact, this kind of material has always been considered inferior in the spear manual. It has an extremely bad reputation, it's too soft, and its toughness is all fake. When a layman wields it, he might be able to shake out some beautiful spear moves, but those street vendors, with spear tips at the throat and spear bodies that curve in a big arc, which one of them isn't a pewter spear? Give him a Bailiang spear and try it. Do you dare?" Speaking of this, our Bailiang really put in a lot of effort. Among the world's most famous wood for making spears, the red and white cowhide wood from the Guangling Road, the red ridge wood and red ridge wood from the old southern Tang dynasty, and the slightly inferior Cushio tea stick. All of them are good materials, but none of them can be found in our Bailiang. In the end, the pewter spear produced in the eastern Hunan plain was rarely seen in our Bailiang, but it was popular in the other vassal kingdoms. Why? Isn't it because the materials are cheap, the soldiers can learn to use them quickly, and they look good when they practice martial arts? This old man heard that in our border army, not to mention the heavy iron spears used by the elite soldiers, regardless of whether it's the cavalry or the gate, all of them are good wood that is as strong as iron. Just talking about the money spent, who knows how much gold and silver is spent? Especially since we have to ship them from other places to Bailiang to make spears, it's even more expensive. The maintenance of a good spear is even more expensive. After all, with so many spears being made every year, it's estimated that the tung oil used to make them can't escape. Therefore, our Bailiang cavalry is the best in the world, not just because Bailiang's athletes are born with outstanding physical strength. Su Fengnian deeply agreed. He took a sip of wine and nodded, saying, "That's exactly the reason." The old man spoke enthusiastically and drank quickly. He didn't have too many misgivings when he spoke. He was slightly distracted and said, "Everyone knows that the impact of a cavalry spear when they charge is astonishing, but they often overlook the damage that the spear technique does to the cavalry itself. If the charge between the two armies is a one-off deal, then that's fine. But the Baimang barbarians that our Bailiang is facing aren't easy to deal with either. This requires a lot of skill when it comes to wielding a spear to kill. And this level of skill varies from person to person. In Bailiang, there are no lack of cavalry commanders and spear experts who can solve this problem. But in this old man's opinion, although it seems to be good enough, it's not really perfect. Su Fengnian asked, "Old sir, what do you mean?" The old man hesitated for a moment, as if he was afraid that he would violate the taboo of speaking too much with a stranger. But then he thought that they were just strangers who met by chance, so why should he be so wary? Moreover, he was drinking wine, wasn't he? He continued, "This old man has seen 4 or 5 types of Baliang spears by chance. There are differences in material, weight, and length. According to the soldier's soldier type, height, arm length, and strength, it's indeed quite detailed. Compared to the army in Liang, it's much better. But there are still things that can be dug deeper. For example, the Miao bamboo spear nicknamed Shu Fei has been treated, but it's not that easy to crack. In this old man's opinion, its spearhead should be increased by 1 or 2.5 inches. As for the iron cicada spear used by the infantry, 2 inches of the spear body is still not enough. It should be reduced by that length." At this point, the old man stretched out 2 fingers and gently gestured. Su Fengnian, who originally only wanted to chat casually, fell into deep thought and did not immediately jump to a conclusion. It was hard for Su Fengnian to say how heavy the tip of the Miaozhu spear should be, but Su Yanbing did mention it once. In the past, this kind of heavy spear was used to deal with the Westchu iron cavalry in the Spring and Autumn War, especially in the battle against the Great Halberd warriors. Almost every old Baliang soldier who participated in the Battle of Jinghe River had deep feelings for this spear. In that battle, which was second only to the Battle of West Wall, the Su family army could directly use the iron cicada spear as a hammer. Su Yanbing said this because although the Beimang army also had heavy armor, it was still inferior to the Dechu dynasty even after more than 20 years of prosperity. Beimang also had light cavalry, so the iron cicada spear did not need to be so heavy. However, the reform involved not only the countless interests of the border army, but also the most troublesome feelings. Many old cavalry generals objected fiercely when Wutongan implemented the reform that involved a series of specific matters. One of them was the iron cicada spear. An old general directly refuted with such a vulgar reason, "I am used to hugging a plump wife, I would rather not have a light woman. Whoever likes it can have it. After all, none of my soldiers are willing to accept it." At that time, Wutongan had sent a large pile of documents to Su Fengnian to read. When Su Fengnian saw this, Su Fengnian took it as a rather refreshing joke. He thought that it would be better to let nature take its course and did not have the intention to force it to be implemented. As the old man continued to speak, he said, "I am used to hugging a plump wife, I would rather not have a light woman. Whoever likes it can have it. After all, none of my soldiers are willing to accept it." At that time, Wutongan had sent a large pile of documents to Su Fengnian to read. When Su Fengnian saw this, Su Fengnian took it as a rather refreshing joke. He thought that it would be better to let nature take its course and did not have the intention to force it to be implemented. "It is not expensive, only 6 taels of silver. It is just that I cannot afford it, so I can only shamelessly look at it and not buy it. There are more than 10,000 words, really haggling over every penny. Looking at it is amazing. I have never been on the battlefield, but when I look at it, I feel like I am fighting against a martial arts expert. My whole body is cold." The white-clothed immortal soldier, who is loved by His Majesty, even has the rules of where the toilets in the barracks should be built in the book. The soldiers he brought out only need to follow the rules. No wonder Yi Baikue, the military saint of West Chu, said that if you fight against this person, once you lose your power, you will not be able to recover. The tall youth blinked and asked, "Grandpa, what do you mean?" The old man sighed and said, "It means that if you fight with this person, as long as he takes the initiative, you can only wait to lose, regardless of whether you have the advantage in numbers or not. This principle is actually the same as us martial artists competing in martial arts. It's just that you haven't reached that level yet, so you won't understand." The old man fiercely gulped down a mouthful of wine and said sullenly, how can such a magnificent military book fall into the hands of the common people? Aren't you afraid that the northern barbarians will take it? How many more of our Bailiang will die then? The old man sighed and didn't even want to drink anymore. He muttered to himself, Chen Jibao indeed lost to the current king of Bailiang and didn't become the ruler of Bailiang. But this isn't a reason for the Bailiang army to ruin his hard work. Our new King Liang, isn't he going to do something about it? Or is he doing this on purpose because he has a personal grudge? If that's really the case, then this old man will really look down on him. Su Fengnian's expression changed slightly. The Bailiang army had never purposely banned the essentials of military preparation. Back then, Su Xiao and Chen Jibao didn't have any objections to it. This was probably the conceit of the higher-ups of Bailiang. Su Fengnian also didn't have the intention to slander Chen Jibao's military book just because Chen Jibao left Liang and entered the capital and became the king of Shu. In reality, even Chen Jibao's old subordinates still treated him well. He personally and severely dealt with a few cases where he deliberately suppressed Chen Jibao's old subordinates and promoted them. However, in the past 6 months, Su Fengnian had personally written and carefully read through at least 8,000 copies of official documents. Not a single one had mentioned the essentials of military preparation in the marketplace. But this still made Su Fengnian feel very guilty. At this time, he subconsciously picked up his wine bowl and drank a mouthful of wine. Then he said softly, "The king of Bailiang has indeed made a great mistake in this matter." The old man dismissed it with a smile. How dare they, the common people, point fingers at the vassal king? Were they tired of living? Besides, who was the publicly recognized #1 person in the world after Wang Xianji in Martial Emperor City? Even the most ignorant rural women and children in the northern Liang region probably knew about it. Su Fengnian raised his head and asked, "Sir, with your knowledge of the spear, why didn't you join the border army?" Chapter 1208. The old man revealed a painful expression and tried his best to make his tone light. "It's true that my family is used to using spears, but before my family fell, I didn't like to get involved with the rich and powerful. I only hope that everyone in my family can practice martial arts in peace and one day bring our family's spear techniques to greater heights. As for other things, I never thought too much about it. My ancestors said that practicing the spear is to train the heart. If the heart is too messy, you won't be able to practice a good spear. To people like us who use spears, it's tantamount to neglecting the essentials." Su Fengnian calmly said 3 words, "Sun family spear." The old man, who was originally kind and friendly like a neighbor's elder, suddenly changed. He lowered his hand and grabbed the white candle on the bench. His turbid eyes shone brightly and were filled with murderous intent. The 2 young men stood up almost at the same time and gripped the wooden poles in their hands tightly. This made the lady boss who was eating melon seeds jump in fright. She was stunned on the spot. Su Fengnian gently held the wine bowl and didn't rush to drink. He smiled and said, "I don't have any bad intentions. Since I have a friend who is an expert in spear, of course I know about the famous Sun family from the same hometown as spear immortal Wang Xiu. Old Mr. also told me so much. I'm just guessing. I've also heard a little about the Sun family's misfortune. Back then, a young man called Wuxia came to learn martial arts. The old man of the Sun family saw that he had a good foundation, but his conduct was not good, so he ignored him. After Wuxia was rejected, he had a few fortuitous encounters and soared all the way to success. He became Sun Dinyo's bodyguard instructor, who used to be a general in the border army. This person was born to be petty and had always held a grudge against the Sun family. After the old man of the Sun family passed away, he relied on the Sun family's background and the connections he accumulated in the government to accuse the Sun family of betraying the Liang. Of the 40 people, only 6 escaped, including 2 infants. In the past 10 years, 3 of the Sun family members died under Wuxia's spear. 2 of them were not as skilled as others, and one of them secretly betrayed the Sun family. However, after the old man of the Sun family passed away, he relied on the Sun family's background and the connections he accumulated in the government to accuse the Sun family of betraying the Liang. Of the 40 people, only 6 escaped, including 2 infants. In these 10 years, 3 of the Sun family members died under He Wushu's spear. 2 of them were not as skilled as others, and one of them secretly betrayed the Sun family. But after the old man of the Liang, he didn't get a chance. Sun Qingqiu, old master Sun, am I right? The old man's face was as cold as water. He sneered and said in a desolate tone, good. What a tiger head spear proclamation. Sure enough, after joining the fish dragon gang, you're like a tiger that has grown wings. You actually chased me all the way here. When the old man agreed, he threw a glance at the 2 youths. He wanted the 2 children to run for their lives without caring about him, so he couldn't refuse. However, how could the young man escape at this moment? His feet were rooted to the ground, and he did not retreat an inch. This made the old man not know whether to feel happy or sad. The spear of the Sun clan would not retreat until the person was dead. Su Fengnian was still holding his wine bowl. He mocked himself, old man's son, do I look like a henchman of Wushu? Or do they look like assassins who are chasing after you? But who in the world would treat someone to a drink before killing someone like me? The tall youth said angrily, you bastard, you must have poisoned the wine. The proprietress was not happy at all. She had roughly heard some clues from the conversation. She didn't believe that the young man was a bad person at all. Who asked him to be so handsome? She slammed the table and said angrily, what are you talking about? Do I look like a gangster's shop? Your wine was personally served by me. It's new wine that has just been opened. Child, which eye of yours saw the young master poisoning the wine? Su Fengnian asked directly, old man's son, do you really think that the 3 of you are a match for me alone? The old man didn't say anything. He didn't relax at all, but his expression was dejected. After roaming the Jianghu for most of his life, especially after more than a decade of running for his life, the old man had developed a pair of discerning eyes and a sharp intuition for danger. The moment he reached out to grab the pole, the young man beside him, whose aura was like that of an ordinary person, flashed with a shocking aura. The old man had no choice but to admit that he was no match for him at all. Su Fengnian asked, old man's son, I have a presumptuous request. I want you to go to the border army to be a military instructor who teaches spear techniques. However, I won't care about the grievances between the Sun clan and Wushu. I don't think you would want others to interfere. The old man laughed coldly. This young master of unknown origin, don't think that just because you have some martial arts skills that you can talk big. I'm not that ignorant child. I know that the military instructor of our Beiliang army is a 4th-level general. If you were talking about an ordinary instructor position, I would think that you were a son of a general with an extraordinary status and believe you. Is the position of military instructor something you can give away just because you say so? Do you think you're the administrator's son, Li Hanlin? Su Fengnian couldn't help but laugh. He didn't expect Li Hanlin to be so famous in Beiliang now. It sounded like a good reputation. The delicate young man standing to Su Fengnian's side like he was facing a great enemy looked at this man's evil smile and wanted to kill him with one blow. Chapter 1209. Su Fengnian truly did not know how to convince Sun Qingqiu, but this old man was very likely to be a huge treasure to the Beiliang army. If used well, it could allow the border army's fighting strength to reach a higher level. It could be said that Sun Qingqiu, who had displayed his skills and completely instilled his entire life's worth of knowledge into Beiliang, was even more beneficial to Beiliang than Han Laozhan, Wang Xiu's junior brother, who was currently the deputy general of Lingzhou. Of course, all of this was just a possibility, but if they missed it, then it would not even be a possibility anymore. Su Fengnian raised his hand. This movement very quickly attracted the old man's swift and violent spear attack. The wax spear did not seem to have any momentum, but it slanted downwards, accurately and viciously stabbing towards Su Fengnian's throat. It was clean and crisp, and it contained the essence of the Sun family spear technique, pressing forward courageously. In the end, the two youths saw that the spearhead of the wax spear stopped several inches away from the person. Then, the wax spear, which was in line with the Sun family's unique no-return aura, was instantly squeezed out in a large arc and then shattered on the spot. After Su Fengnian raised his hand, a young woman in tight black clothes mysteriously appeared in the shade of the tree. After seeing this scene, her exquisite figure was completely expressionless. She was the death warrior, Fan Shaochai, who had just left the whisk room not long ago. Sun Qingqiu held half of the wax spear. His palm was split open and covered in blood. Even though the old man was already certain that he was not this person's opponent, his spear attack returning without any result still shocked the old man too much. He believed that this spear attack of his was something that even those second-level experts who were usually elusive would not be able to deal with so lightly. Moreover, this young man sitting there did not move at all. There was not even the slightest movement of his qi. Su Fengnian did not look at Fan Shaochai. He only said, "You don't have to follow me for a while. Take the old man to the border of Liangzhou and find Lu Qiu, I have already decided on the official position. As for how to use the Sun family spear technique, let Lu Qiu, decide for herself." Then, Su Fengnian asked with a smile, "Old master, are you sure you don't want to make a profitable business?" The old man was an open-minded person. After thinking for a while, he sighed and said, "Anyway, I have no choice. Let's see if God wants to destroy my Sun family. I don't believe that he Wuxia, a branch leader of the fish dragon gang, can order you around." Su Fengnian breathed a sigh of relief and asked tentatively, "Would you like to leave after we finish the wine?" The old man sat down. "Drink, why aren't you drinking?" The two youths trembled as they returned to their seats. Especially the delicate and pretty youth, he was completely dumbfounded. As for the hot-headed and tall youth, his face was filled with worship. He must have really met the legendary otherworldly expert. So when this young master said that he was a little tall, he was really tall. After this incomparably excited youth sat down, he anxiously asked, "Master, young master, my grandfather always said that my talent in martial arts is not very good. Your vision must be higher than my grandfather's. Why don't you help me take a look? Could it be that I'm actually a martial arts genius?" Su Fengnian looked at the youth and said calmly, "Logically speaking, you are still a long way from your grandfather's age." The youth opened his mouth wide and still did not give up. With a sad face, he asked, "What?" "Master, young master, don't make a mistake. Can you take a closer look?" Su Fengnian smiled and shook his head. "It's harder to make a mistake than not to make a mistake." The youth sighed and drooped his head, not saying anything. The delicate and pretty youth covered his mouth and snickered. But when the master, who was not as repulsive as before, looked in his direction, he subconsciously glared at him. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Practice your spear well. You will have a great future." No one said that a woman can't practice a fierce and invincible first-rate spear art. The youth blushed. The proprietress, who had been startled many times, looked at this youth. No wonder he looked like a little girl. The woman was really stupid and bold. She joked, "Master, young master, you can't not pay for the wine just because you are a master." Su Fengnian took out a small piece of silver and put it on the table. The proprietress smiled and said, "Oh, you really didn't pay a cent more. Master, young master, you are a master. Can't you be a little more generous? Aren't you afraid that it will damage your master's demeanor?" Fan Shaochai, a loyalist not far away, recalled all the things that had happened to her. She began to admire the courage of this village woman. Su Fingnian smiled and said, "Only the master knows that oil and salt are expensive. Nowadays, I don't have the capital to puff myself up at my own cost." Su Fingnian suddenly saw the blue and white falcon circling overhead. He slowly got up and said, "Grandfather, I have something to do. I will go first. We will come back to the border of Liangzhou to drink with you. I believe there will be a chance." Sun Qingqiu also stood up and nodded, not saying anything. Su Fingnian disappeared in a flash after he finished speaking. This made the woman and the two Sun family youths think that they had met a god or a ghost. Fan Shaochai said coldly, "After drinking, we will go to the border immediately." Sun Qingqiu grunted. The tall youth stared at this elder sister with his eyes wide open. He couldn't take his eyes off her. The girl dressed as a man was a little envious. She was really a beautiful elder sister, but she gave people the impression that she was too cold. The proprietress sitting at the next table patted her chest hard and said, "Today was really an eye-opener." The old man took a sip of wine, narrowed his eyes and said softly, "Who said it wasn't?" Fan Shaochai stood in the shade with her eyes closed. Her intuition told her that Beimang should have sent out troops. She had no interest in the ups and downs of the three Sun family members. As for that Fu Wushu of the Fish Dragon gang, perhaps for the three of them, he was an enemy that they wanted to kill for the rest of their lives but couldn't. But the gap between her and her enemy was like the distance between heaven and earth. She knew that she would never be able to kill this man with her own hands in this lifetime. After all, even Wang Xianji couldn't kill him. But this didn't mean that he wouldn't die. Because he had to face the whole of Beimang. Chapter 12:10. Su Fingnian quietly returned to Mount Qingliang. Just as Fan Shaochai had predicted, Beimang had indeed begun to move their troops southward. Moreover, they had divided their troops into three groups, each attacking the three provinces separately. This was very different from what Beiliang had expected, because the position of King of the South had been vacant after Su Huainan's death. The position of King of the North had been vacant since then, and King of the North, who was not even a feudal official, had become the second most powerful man in the world. Even Su Fingnian was not sure if it was the meticulous plan of Taiping Commandery, or if it was Dong Zhuo's deliberate pestering. Most of the time, it was said that the smart people were good at dealing with changes by sticking to the status quo. However, this kind of military affair that involved the final trend of the two dynasties was like a fight between two masters. Not only did it test the depth of their internal energy, it also tested the scheming of both sides. The lesson of being greedy for small gains and losing big gains was especially taboo. The lesson of winning a series of battles but losing the overall situation could be seen in the recent spring and autumn period. The reason why Su Fingnian had such a headache was that Beiliang's resources were far inferior to Beimang's. Empress Murong was able to confidently launch a three-pronged attack. On one hand, she had sent Tuoba to lead the troops to suppress the grasslands in Norland. On the other hand, she had used the elite cavalry of Southern Dynasty to provoke Beiliang. She could even send a large number of troops to the Eastern Front, eyeing the borderline that Gu Jiantang had built. Of course, even an idiot would know that the final confrontation on the Eastern Front, Li Yang and Liang Mang were well aware of it. They were just putting on airs. Otherwise, they would not have left the three trading towns in the northern pass of Ji province open. When Su Fingnian, who was sitting alone in the pavilion in the middle of Tide Hark Lake, thought of this, a wry smile crept up the corner of his mouth. He had used his army to force Great Peace City to submit to him, and had no choice but to loosen the embargo on transporting grain to Liao province. He had also indirectly admitted that Lu province was the rightful ruler of Liuzhou, and Song Dongming had overstepped his authority. Therefore, the imperial court immediately retaliated, and did not even bother to find a fig leaf. It was said that the trade at the northern border of Ji province was much livelier than usual. Yuan Tingshan, who was once threatened by Su Fingnian to be skinned alive, was thrown into the border of Ji province by his foster father, Gu Jiantang. Now, he had become the commandant of horse tampering with 4,000 old soldiers of Ji province, and had more than 20 forts of various sizes under his command. At the same time, he was also in charge of 3 counties, and his territory was getting closer and closer to Bailiang. The power he had in his hands was almost equal to half a provincial governor and a general with real power. No doubt, this was a silent mockery of Su Fengnian, the vassal king of Bailiang. Especially after Li Huli, the eldest son of Wild Goose Castle in Ji province, died suddenly in Quicksnow Mountain Villa. Yuan Tingshan, who was very popular in the border area of Liang dynasty, was about to become the son-in-law of Wild Goose Castle, marrying the famous woman who was known as Li Jiaxuan. In addition, Yuan Tingshan had a very close relationship with the first prince, Zhao Wu, of Liao province. It could be said that Yuan Tingshan's wings were fully grown, and even the nobles in Great Peace City no longer treated him as the foster son of Gu Jiantang. Yuan Tingshan, as a stray dog, had become a shining star in the dynasty in just 2 years. There were even some people who were secretly adding fuel to the fire, and had raised Yuan Tingshan to the position of Su Fengnian's mortal enemy. Su Fengnian sat on a bench in the pavilion with 2 boxes of chess pieces on his knees. He held a dozen or so round and pleasant chess pieces. As time passed, they were soaked in his warmth and were no longer cold. Su Fengnian's thoughts drifted to the Tai and city that he hated and feared in his heart when he was young. He smiled. Just like when he was young, he always felt that Mount Qingliang was the highest mountain in the world. Only after he left Liangzhou did he know that Mount Wudong had 81 peaks. After he left Bailiang, he saw many magnificent mountains and rivers with his own eyes. With the increase of experience, many of the deep-rooted thoughts of the past involuntarily faded away. After Qi Yanglong, the Grand Chancellor of Shangyin Academy, entered Tai and city, even the slow-witted official sensed a storm brewing. Although Grand Chancellor Qi only held an idle job in the Imperial College for the time being and his official rank was far inferior to the Right Chancellor Jean Lanting, what was even more incomprehensible was that the Imperial College had 7 schools under its jurisdiction. It was only after Gu Jiantang stepped down as the Minister of War that he was allowed to add martial arts. However, Grand Chancellor Qi, who was as knowledgeable as the sky, chose to be the supervisor of the least popular martial arts. In terms of quality, he was barely on par with the Imperial College. In terms of quality, he was barely on par with the officials of the Imperial College. In terms of the original position in the Imperial College, the director of the martial arts, who had been neglected, was a whole imperial road away from the Imperial College. But in fact, those scholars who used to be considered clean and honest in the capital weren't even qualified to carry Qi Yanglong's shoes. During this period of time, not to mention the hundreds of officials from the Imperial College led by Jean Lanting, even the tens of thousands of students in the Imperial College were anxious. Those whose family backgrounds belonged to the upper class and who switched from the Imperial College to the martial arts overnight didn't even need to cry and shout to enter the martial arts school. Their family backgrounds were only average in the capital. They didn't even need to cry and shout that they wanted to enter the martial arts school. Their parents had already started to use silver to build connections. It was tacky to give silver. However, the Liang dynasty was so prosperous that it had created a prosperous situation that had never been seen in thousands of years. The capital was also the richest city in the world. Who didn't have a few rare calligraphy and paintings? In particular, those that had been stamped with the word fake were the best stepping stones to smoothly enter the doors of the big bosses of the Ministry of Rights. No matter how much the people of the capital cursed the young man in Bailiang, when it came to the identification of authentic works, that guy's picky eyes were very convincing. As long as he recklessly wasted a natural treasure and labeled it as a fake, it was 100% authentic. Moreover, although the young man's surname was Su and not Zhao, he had now become a proper vassal king and had defeated old monster Wang, who was recognized as invincible in the world. As long as he had his seal, no matter if it was square or round, a calligraphy or painting could be sold at a sky-high price in the capital. Su Fengnian didn't have any feelings about this matter. He was more concerned about the direction of the murderous battle between the dragon and the deer that was about to happen. According to the secret report, this Grand Chancellor, who was praised as a person who could be compared with 1,000,000 soldiers, was not really making a small fuss in the martial arts field of the Imperial College. Instead, he began to compile new scriptures under the instructions of the Emperor of the Zhao family. He even used his official status to explain the complete meaning of the Confucian sage for the first time for the Zhao family. It seemed to be icing on the cake for the imperial examination, but in fact, it was to shake the foundation of Zhonglu. This time, Qi Yanglong took the lead in compiling the classics. Just by looking at the two assistants, one could see how much importance the emperor attached to him. The left chancellor of the Imperial College, Yao Baifeng, and the Grand Secretary, Yan Jieshi, who was a relative of the emperor, were only assistants to Qi Yanglong. Was Qi Yanglong really just compiling a few volumes of books? He was setting the rules for all the scholars in the world for hundreds of years from now on. Su Fengnian clenched the chess piece in his hand and said to himself, "It's okay if Bai Yan loses. Anyway, Zhonglu has always been hostile to Beiliang. If Qi Yanglong can still suppress Bai Yan, Beiliang's situation will only get worse and worse in the future, won't it? Do I have the extravagant hope that Sage Qi, who is destined to accompany the sacrificial ceremony in the Imperial Ancestral Temple, will treat Beiliang differently?" Mr. Wang, who lost the debate between heaven and man, said that Qi Yanglong had always had a deep hatred for all the vassals including Beiliang. He once said, "You can be crowned as a king, but you can't split the land." At first glance, you can tell that he is an imperial tutor who works for the emperor. However, compared with his student Sun Ping, Qi Yanglong is undoubtedly much more experienced and tactful. He knows when he should not go out of the mountain and when he should. Anyway, he has the final say in protecting himself and helping the world. First, it was Bai Mang's peace decree, then it is Qi Yanglong. Can't there be fewer opponents like this? Su Fengnian sighed and withdrew his gaze. Great Peace City is always worrisome. The Beiliang Palace under my feet is also not a small courtyard with a gentle breeze. Chapter 12:11. Everyone in Mount Qingliang knew that a powerful figure had arrived. He was a scholar from Gangnam-do's Deer County. No one had heard of him before, but he had mysteriously become the deputy administrator of Beiliang. This was an unprecedented high-ranking official position in the Liang dynasty. Logically speaking, he should be one of the primary third rank and secondary second rank. However, Zhao Shi of Great Peace City turned a blind eye to this. He did not reprimand nor did he admit it. It was as if he had made up his mind to let Beiliang do whatever they wanted. Rumor had it that because of this, Wang Lifting, the manager of the Lingzhou Golden Weaving Bureau, had a headache. He did not know how to sew a fitting official robe for the deputy administrator. Whether the official patch was a first-rank crane or a second-rank peacock, it was still uncertain. Mount Qingliang was already used to this. Previously, there were two even younger scholars. Su Beiji, who was born in Beimang, was already the manager of Lingzhou. Even Chen Shiliang, who was the son of a humble concubine, had become the city magistrate of Qingzhang City in Liuzhou. Another scholar from the Song family who had suddenly gained power was nothing. Moreover, it was said that during the Yonghui era, when the pillars of the imperial court had emerged one after another to shoulder the burden, he had competed with the head of the prime minister, Yin Mao Chen, for the number one scholar. Such an outstanding figure had a much higher starting point than Su Beiji and Chen Shiliang. Nowadays, the atmosphere in Beiliang had changed. The status of scholars gradually rose with the tide. This was already the trend. As for the sudden appearance of Deputy Administrator Song Dongming, there were not so many rumors. Originally, Su Beiji and Chen Shiliang had suffered a lot because of this matter. Fortunately, on Mount Qingliang, even the coachmen and cooks were people who had seen the world, so they didn't pay too much attention to Song Dongming's arrival. After Song Dongming entered this grand prince's estate located in the northwest of the dynasty, he didn't spend his days as unrestrained and leisurely as Su Beiji, nor did he live in seclusion like Chen Shiliang, who rarely came out. He didn't wear an official robe that fit him, so he only wore an ordinary scholar's robe. He usually lived in a serene and elegant courtyard on the mountainside. Intentionally or unintentionally, he had won over a group of advisors and officials who had originally been gloomy in the prince's estate. The small courtyard was called Huaigui. Because it sounded like Huaigui, it didn't have a good meaning. It was very easy for people to associate it with the words harboring evil intentions, which was a taboo. As a result, even though the view was excellent, and when the weather was clear and bright, one could see half of Liangzhou's city through the window, it had still been abandoned for many years. Song Dongming had chosen this place to stay. The servants of the estate only knew that he had never set foot in the Wutongan, where orioles and swallows have red clay in their mouths. However, there would often be women in the courtyard who held great power coming and going, and then there would constantly be unfamiliar faces entering Huaigui courtyard. Some of them left, while others stayed. Su Fingnian was lost in thought. Song Dongming not only needed to be used, but should be used greatly. However, compared to Su Beiji and Chen Shiliang, whose minds were not complicated, Song Dongming was much more difficult to use. Liang Mang's war was imminent. Just as he had a large number of high-quality chess pieces, Beiliang also had a large number of good chess pieces. Among the generals, there were bright stars. Yan Wenwan, Jean Partridge, Zhou Kang, Ancestor Gu, He Zhonghu, Chen Yunxue, Chu Lushan, Yuan Zuozong, Ningame, Wang Lingbao, Li Mofan, and so on. There were simply inexhaustible talents. But what about the civil officials? In particular, the officials who could make Liang drool could be counted on one's fingers, not to mention the large number of loyal court officials who had sprung up like bamboo shoots after the rain during Yonghui's reign. It was no wonder that the Liang imperial court liked to ridicule Beiliang for following his example. If Su Shao was crippled, the entire Beiliang officialdom would be crippled as well. The civil and military officials would be unbalanced, and it would be difficult for them to make a difference. In war, it was not enough to say that the martial artists could fight well and not be afraid of death. Especially in the upcoming war, where tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of soldiers would be involved in a local campaign. The civil officials first had to be able to not be a burden. If they could also complement the martial artists, many fewer people would die. Su Fingnian raised his head and furrowed his brows. Starting from the foot of Mount Qingliang, the fish-duck crossbows continuously shot into the air. The closer they got to Tide Hark Lake, where he, the king of Beiliang, was resting, the denser the crossbow bolts became. After Su Fingnian returned from Beimang with the two heads of Su Huainan and Diwu Raccoon of Mount Tibing, the Jianghu heroes who dared to assassinate Beiliang Palace completely disappeared. After all, those Jianghu people who were able to make a name for themselves, no matter how irreconcilable their hatred was, were not fools who were willing to throw themselves into a trap. This was especially so after the battle between Su Fingnian and Wang Xianji that showed disdain for the Wulin world. Many of the Spring and Autumn clan men of sacrifice who had been hiding in Beiliang for many years silently left the country along with those generals and rich gentry. This group of people was truly discouraged. Su Fingnian could not think of anyone who could completely conceal their qi and arrive at the foot of Mount Qingliang, then suddenly charge into the palace. Even Su Fingnian could not clearly capture that indistinct figure. Logically speaking, if Zhao Shi wanted him to arm wrestle with Beimang, he could die, but he could not die too early. As for Beimang, Hong Jingyan and Murong Baoding had only recently appeared in Liuzhou, so there shouldn't be anyone who would be so bored as to come alone. Tuoba had this strength, but the mindset of the war god of Beimang had always been more inclined to achieve great feats on the battlefield. Just as Su Fingnian was feeling puzzled, he saw a figure dash out of the nearby Tide Harp Pavilion. Su Fingnian was absent-minded for a moment. Before Su Fengnian went up the mountain to practice his swordsmanship, Su Fengnian brought back the white fox face. It was a snowy winter and the white fox face was swordsmanship on the lake. At that time, Su Fengnian really thought that it was the most powerful swordsmanship in the world. Now that he looked back, White Fox's bladesmanship and bladesmanship were still superior, but there was still a gap between it and Gu Jiantang's and Chao Changqing's thunder of mind and heart of mind that he had seen in Tai and City. However, White Fox's face was the first Jianghu expert he had confirmed in his 3 years of travel. Of course, after that, Old Huang, the old man with the blade who came out from the bottom of the lake, the old hierarch Wang Zhongluo, and the old man with the sheepskin fur coat gradually appeared in his vision. Each of them had their own charm, and all of them were admirable. His reverence for Jianghu arose spontaneously. Chapter 12:12. Bai Hu-er's face passed by the tall figure 1,000 feet away from the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Su Fengnian stood up. After the assassin paused for a moment, which was difficult to detect, Su Fengnian immediately recognized the newcomer's identity. It was a completely unexpected senior. A nameless swordsman who loved to eat swords. Sui Xie Valley. It was the old man who lent his sword to Su Fengnian and saved his life from Han Diaoxi. Su Fengnian stood and walked out of the pavilion. Before he could walk down the stairs, the old ancestor eater's sword came to the pavilion. The one-armed old man who exchanged his arm with Li Chungang lifted the sleeve of his broken arm. More than half of the sleeve was cut off. He said, Gu Jiantang doesn't have such a sharp blade technique at his age. One blade is roughly equivalent to Gu Jiantang from 8 years ago. What about 2 blades? Su Fengnian stepped down the stairs and smiled. Junior greets old ancestor Sui. The old man went straight to the point. I won't haggle over your hospitality. Kid, you owe this old man your life. Give him 7 or 8 good swords first as an appetizer. How you repay your kindness later on will be calculated slowly. Kid, you robbed Wang Xianji's belongings from Martial Emperor City. I think this old man is in for a treat this time. Su Fengnian smiled and said, unfortunately, the family head of the sword tomb blocked the way at River Prefecture. Most of the famous swords were destroyed. But since old ancestor is here, there are still some good swords in the treasury. Senior, you will be full for every day you stay here. The old man glanced at the young man who he used to look down on and laughed. Kid, this is what makes you hard to hate. Although you are not a good person, you are not stingy at all. The old man stepped into the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Su Fengnian followed behind him and asked softly, Dong Tai didn't enter Bailiang with senior. Sui Xie Valley rolled his eyes and said, he doesn't want to get involved in the court disputes. This old man is the same. It's just that Tantai Pingjing is the only demon in this old man's heart. This old man has been thinking about her for 80 years. Since she came to Bailiang, this old man naturally has to keep an eye on her. If she cheats, this old man can kill her immediately. Su Fengnian did not know whether to laugh or cry. Naturally, he could only stand aside and watch obediently. Su Fengnian received the news very quickly. Not only did White Fox Face leave the building, she also left the city. She only carried a single blade, the Spring Thunder. Without any hesitation, she brought Wang Xing who was helping to carry the winter-embroidered blade and the 7 swords to Beimang. She did not even bid farewell to Su Fengnian before she left. This made Su Fengnian feel a little sad. After Sui Xie Valley sat down, he said something shocking. With Xia Feiyu's help to capture the flood dragons of all sizes in Shu, Chen Jibao will soon catch up with Wang Xianji. The old man gloated, Su Fengnian, don't tell me you have a feud with everyone with Ji in their name. Su Fengnian smiled bitterly and shook his head. However, he was shocked and nodded slowly. He remembered the most hidden shadow of the Qin dynasty 800 years ago. His name did not have the word Ji in it, but was called Chao Ji. The old man was just speaking casually. He did not care about this messy and confusing theory of numerology. Su Fengnian, who had a gloomy expression, leaned against the pillar of the pavilion and closed his eyes. Then, his expression turned for the better. He stood up and looked into the distance again. Wuxia Valley, who had 2 snow-white eyebrows, stretched out 2 fingers and twirled one of his long eyebrows. He stared at the young man whose state of mind had changed and slowly fell into deep thought. From the southeast where there were streams and drizzles to the northwest where there were yellow sands and strong winds, a pair of master and disciple walked for thousands of miles. They were finally about to enter Bailiang. They were about to approach the Wudong mountain that was full of incense. Finally, at the end of this auspicious year, they would climb the mountain amidst the heavy snow. At this moment, the young master was carrying his exhausted disciple and was walking slowly. "Master, after becoming a Taoist, will I have to memorize a lot of books?" "Not necessarily. Master, Mr. Seuss said that you are the best Taoist on the mountain. Since I am your disciple, I have to cultivate well and focus on Taoism. I am afraid that I will not do well. In life, one should be at ease with one's circumstances. This is cultivation and it is also a blessing." "Master, I don't understand. What does it mean to be at ease with one's circumstances?" "It means to stop when you are tired. When you are not tired, you can continue. We Taoists seek Taoism. Actually, it is not in the sky but under our feet." "Master, then let me walk on my own. I am not tired anymore." "It's okay. I will carry you again." "But master, won't this not be at ease with one's circumstances?" "Yu Fu, remember. There are some things in this world that are more important than cultivation." "Ha! Just like when you are walking on the road and you see someone. Even if you are not tired, you are not willing to walk anymore. Then, you can stop and look at her. It seems to go against the heavenly Tao. But in the eyes of Master's martial uncle, it does not go against the great Tao. Whether I am Taoist or not, why should I need someone else to tell me?" "Sigh, Master, it sounds like being a Taoist is really difficult." "But Master, you also have martial uncles." "Of course Master has martial uncles. Master's martial uncles will also have martial uncles. In the future, there will also be people on the mountain who will call you martial uncles." "Master, look. The leaves of the tree over there are red. Then let's stop and take a look." "Okay." Wudong Taoist Li Yufu put down his disciple, Yu Fu, and held his hand. They looked up at the yellow tree with bright red autumn leaves. The autumn tree was like a woman in red. He did not dare to calculate everything because the world was unpredictable. He did not dare to have deep feelings for fear that it would be a big dream. Li Yufu lowered his head and looked at the child who was in a daze. "Martial uncle, do you really want to dream for 300 years? Li Yufu looked at the heaven and earth with a determined gaze. The people of the world seemed to be proving the heavenly Tao. Everyone had the great Tao to walk on, but they had forgotten it. No matter how high the heavenly Tao was, there would always be a peak. Celestials sat high and were called immortals. But the great Tao was endless. Why was there a need to be high and mighty?" Li Yufu smiled. "Martial uncle, before you died, you told me not to walk on your path. I never understood. Now I understand." Li Yufu let go of his hand and folded his hands. He slowly bowed and bowed 3 times. The first bow was to his parents and teachers. The second bow was to heaven and earth. The third bow was to the great Tao in his heart. Thunder rolled in the entire central plains. But for some reason, there was no thunder in the world. Chapter 12:13. Su Fengnian ordered someone to take out 3 good swords from the armory to make the most expensive dish in the world for Sui Xiagu. The old man would not be courteous to this young man. He casually picked up an ancient sword with the words, "Ice will at the imperfection of Yun Peak," engraved on it and placed it on his knees. He broke off the tip of the sword with his fingers and threw it into his mouth as if he was chewing soybeans. When the young maidservant whose name Su Fingnian did not know left the pavilion to collect the sword, she was stunned and had a special charm. Su Fingnian did not look sideways. Instead, it was the ancestor who looked at the graceful woman and then at the young man who had not yet reached the age of 30. His eyes seemed to be saying, "How can there be such an indifferent and pure king in this world?" Su Fingnian looked at the green lake water. Occasionally, a group of bright-colored carps slid past. Back then, the old man with a blade had been suppressed at the bottom of the lake for many years. When he saw the light of day again, he picked up the nickname Nine Swords Yellow again. At that time, the eldest sister was still in Gangnam-do, the second sister was still studying at the Shangyin Academy, and Su Xiao was not that old yet. He himself was still full of longing and daydreaming about Jianghu. Sui Xiagu ate quickly, drank quickly, and ate even faster. Soon, he was eating the second thunder of thousand gullies. Looking at the absent-minded Su Fingnian, he sneered, "When we first met, all three of your legs were trembling. Now that you've defeated Wang Xianji, you're really like a beggar who has obtained a mountain of gold and silver. You're incomparably extravagant now that you're sitting in the same pavilion as this old man, yet you still dare to daydream." Su Fingnian mentioned the last sword. It was one of the 3 talisman swords of Mount Longhu 300 years ago. It had been hidden in the tide-listening pavilion for many years. It could be said that no one knew about it, but it still shone brightly after being unsheathed. Su Fingnian thought for a while and called for the maidservant who had not gone far to retrieve 2 other good swords. Sui Xiagu did not care about this and joked, "It said that the tide-listening pavilion has a sword rack with 6 peerless swords. This time, 2 of them are among the top 10 swords in the world. One is Fuji, and the other is Shu Dao. When this old man will open his eyes. The more you hide it, the more this old will be hungry. Be careful. He might steal it. When he can't. Others might not be able to get within 10 meters of you, but it shouldn't be difficult for me." Su Fingnian smiled, "It's not that I don't want to take out the Fuji and Shu Dao, it's that I can't. Those 2 swords are my second sister's favorite. She has been wiping them since she was young." Sui Xiagu finished eating the famous sword, Ravine Thunder, and burped. He squinted his eyes and smiled, "If this old man insists on eating it, what will you do?" Su Fingnian smiled but did not say anything. The old man stretched out a finger. His snow-white eyebrows that hung down to his knees were like spiritual snakes coiling around his finger. The servant girl standing on the stone steps outside the pavilion suddenly felt a gloomy chill, as if someone had stuffed a handful of winter snow into her collar. She gently raised her eyebrows and looked at the young vassal king sitting quietly in the pavilion. For some reason, after seeing him, the chill faded a little. For a servant girl like her who was not on duty in Wutangen, the young man in front of her, who was said to be wearing the vassal king's embroidered robe in the near future, was so far away even though he was right in front of her eyes and within her reach. But everyone in Mount Qingliang was already looking forward to him wearing the robe sent by the Golden Thread Weaving Bureau. They were guessing what color it would be. Would it be apricot yellow, or would it be pure blue like the general's robe? Would it be a round dragon or a rising dragon? Would it be made of Sichuan brocade or silk? Especially the women in the prince's mansion. No matter what age they were, they all felt that when he wore the vassal king's embroidered robe, he would be the most handsome man in the world. They also knew that the imperial court had once had the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate personally send over a jade-white embroidered robe. But he had only worn it once at the border before it was locked in a chest and completely banished to the cold palace. The servant girl's mouth was slightly open. The pavilion where the prince and the sword-eating elder had been sitting just a moment ago had suddenly become empty after her momentary absent-mindedness. She did not even feel the slightest breeze. The two of them had disappeared into thin air before her eyes. On the lake between the tide listening pavilion and the pavilion in the middle of the lake, Su Fengnian had his back to the armory as he flew backwards. Although his figure was only a fleeting glimpse, in the eyes of the spectators in the shadows, it was still an indescribable elegance. 3 zhang in front of him was Sui Xiagu with one hand behind his back. His 2 long eyebrows, like a dragon's beard, fluttered in the wind. The two of them did not attack. The illusory Su Fengnian once again paused after reaching the shore. At the same time, Sui Xiagu's slightly leaning figure also appeared in everyone's line of sight. These two people, who stood at the peak of Jianghu despite the great difference in age, still did not openly attack each other. However, the distance between the two of them had already shrunk to 2 zhang. Nothing can be done more than 3 times. Su Fengnian stopped in front of the tide listening pavilion's 3 layers of signboards and did not retreat any further. Sui Xiagu laughed loudly, but he did not insist on barging into the pavilion through the main door. Instead, he pushed off the ground with the tip of his foot and soared upwards. In the blink of an eye, a strange scene appeared. The servant girl in the pavilion craned her neck to look. She saw that the white-browed immortal who had eaten the sword had returned to the tide listening pavilion's platform. He even stretched out his single arm to pat his shoulder as if he was dusting off the dust. Chapter 12-14. Su Fengnian floated in the air at the same height as the 6th floor, looking down at the old man on the ground. The robe under his armpit was cut open by a strand of sword aura that reached the godless realm. The sword aura was formless, and the sword was where the heart was. It was already considered a superior technique, but there were still traces to be found when fighting with a top master. However, if the flying sword technique was formless and godless and unpredictable, then it would be a real headache. As for Dong Tai's flying sword technique, it was clearly a sword, but it was superior to the godless sword aura. He already had the bearing of an immortal swordsman. No one would want to provoke this middle-aged swordsman who had borrowed a sword from Li Chungang and then returned from a visit to the East Sea. After Wang Xianji's death, even Tuoba did not dare to say that he had absolute confidence in winning. At most, he had a 50% chance of winning. The current Su Fengnian did not have the strength to do so. Sui Xiagu, who was 100 years old, was without a doubt the second best swordsman in the world after Deng Tai. Even though the old man mocked himself for having lived 100 years in vain when he went north with Deng Tai, he was still the only swordsman in the hundreds of years of Jianghu. Li Chungang was the only swordsman who could catch up with ancestor Lu in terms of swordsmanship. Deng Tai's swordsmanship was recognized by the world as inferior swordsmanship. Sui Xiagu's swordsmanship was inferior to Li Chuangang's, and his swordsmanship was inferior to Dong Tai's by several generations. However, this was not a reason for Sui Xiagu to be underestimated. Su Fengnian stepped on Sui Xiagu, who was about to fly into the tower. Sui Xiagu responded with courtesy, and his sword aura cut his robe. The atmosphere on the tide listening pavilion side was tense to the extreme. Su Weisheng, who was sitting in a wheelchair, appeared outside the steps. He said calmly, "Just give him the 2 worldly possessions." In her opinion, there was no need to anger the old swordsman with long eyebrows, whose name was not on the rankings, but whose strength was enough to enter the rankings, for 2 swords that she would never have the chance to unsheath. Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "If it's mine, I'll give it away." "Second sister, you like him?" "No way." Sui Xiagu, who had been stopped 4 times in a row, could not help but mock. "What arrogance! Do you really think that a crippled local snake like you can kill all the dragons in the world?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Senior, you asked for it." The corner of Sui Xiagu's mouth twitched as he said darkly, "Oh, this brat is really panting." This old man originally treated it as a joke, but since you don't know what's good for you, this old man will take this opportunity to correct the name of all the swordsmen in the world. Without Wang Xianji, the number 1 in the world should belong to a swordsman. Su Fengnian said indifferently, after the battle with Wang Xianji, I learned a little and comprehended 3 moves. If Senior can withstand them, don't mention handing over Fu Ji and the way of Shudao, even this armory will be yours. After saying this, Su Fengnian raised his hand and the assassins of the prince's residence who were hiding in secret began to retreat rapidly. The dazed servant girl was taken away on the spot and thrown to the other side of Tidehark Lake. Sui Xiagu closed his eyes to rest and waited quietly. Su Wisheng did not move. He only supported his chin with one hand and tilted his head. He looked up at his high and mighty younger brother and the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. It seemed that he really could not beat him up like before. The wind rises at the end of the green duckweed. There was a patch of reeds beside Tidehark Lake. The autumn reeds had already turned gray, their stems slanted and the clumps of fluffy reeds gradually withered. The wind rose and the catkins flew. If one were to look closely, they would see that the hollow stems of the reeds that grew from the water began to break inch by inch in a disorderly manner. In this patch of reeds at the end of autumn, the catkins flew like flying snow. At the same time, the originally tranquil mirror of Tidehark Lake at the waist of Mount Qingliang began to shatter into fine fragments. It was as if countless hammers were tirelessly striking this mirror of water. The occasional koi fish that leapt out of the water were instantly pulverized into fine powder. Countless mottled cracks began to appear on the richly colored wooden pavilion at the center of the lake. The 2 rows of scholar willows on the path to the center of the lake began to emit waves of muffled cracking sounds. In the end, the shore at the foot of Tidehark Pavilion was also affected. From the edge of the water to the empty space beneath Su Fengnian's feet, the entire area was covered with fleeting patterns of air currents. But this undercurrent, intentionally or otherwise, circled around Sui Xiagu and Su Wisheng. However, the 2 were in different situations. Su Wisheng had circled around of his own accord, while the old man was like a rock in the middle of a river, forcefully breaking through the current. Su Fengnian sat, cross-legged, looking down at the motionless Sui Xiagu. In terms of their understanding of the sword, whether it was sword moves or sword intent, they were the most outstanding figures in the world. Su Fengnian had also imitated Li Chuangong's sword attack on the peak of the Great Snow Plateau many times, borrowing 100 swords with great momentum. But Su Fengnian was well aware that this kind of large-scale sword attack was both pleasing to the eye and practical when used against ordinary martial artists. This was because each sword and each sword's sword chi, even if distributed to a single person, the power would still be considerable. But when faced against an opponent like Sui Xiagu, who was on par with him, no one had ever squandered their essence, chi, and spirit in such a manner. Just like when Li Chungang and Wang Xianji met again on the surface of the Eastern Sea in the martial emperor's city after dozens of years, the old man's majestic sword flow seemed to be scattered as it smashed towards Wang Xianji. But in reality, it was one sword after another, and the sword chi was closely intertwined. Su Fengnian was doing the opposite at the Listening Tide Lake. Although he made the first move, he did not make the first move. Instead, he gave the initiative to Sui Xiagu. This was the attitude of a host welcoming a guest. I have brought out a table full of sumptuous food and wine. Whether you want to eat or not depends on whether your appetite is big enough. This move contained not only Li Chuangong's sword intent, but also Xue Songguan's random beat in the rainy alley. It also contained the essence of Deng Tai, A's thunder pool and some of the zen of the dragon tree monk. As long as Sui Xiagu, who was trapped in a circle, made a move, it would affect everything. He would become the enemy of this small world. Whether Sui Xiagu wanted to prove his swordsmanship or the reputation of the world swordsman, he had to first walk out of this small world of Buddhism's cage. Just as Sui Xiagu was about to make his move, Su Fengnian turned to look at Su Wisheng and smiled. Then, he threw a chess piece high up in the air slowly and casually. Chapter 12-15. Sui Xiagu's brows were as long as a white dragon's beard. His tall and sturdy body remained as still as a mountain from the beginning to the end. This kind of action was a result of his 100 years of experience, and also because he dared to challenge Li Chungang and Wang Xianji. If he added Su Fengnian to the mix, the three champions of Jianghu in the past 100 years had all been challenged by him. When Li Chungang returned from the demon-slaying platform, his state of mind was damaged, but Sui Xiagu did not take advantage of the situation. He still asked about the strongest person, the two-sleeved green snake that Li Chungang had mastered to the extreme. After that, Wang Xianji was at the peak of martial arts. No matter how they fought, he was always the strongest. Unfortunately, it was Yu Groom who received the last half of the sword. This was because Wang Xianji wanted to give the final battle to Su Fengnian, who was far away in the northwest. However, from the conversation that Green Power heard, Wang Xianji was definitely not someone that Sui Xiagu could defeat. This time, Sui Xiagu did not enter Beiliang to work for anyone. He wanted to charge and kill the enemy in the Battle of Liangmang. He wanted to compete with Su Fengnian, an old man who did not care about riches and fame. Sui Xiagu was sure that Su Fengnian's original reliance on Gao Shulu's physique had disappeared. Therefore, the only thing that could be done was to kill without spilling blood. This was similar to the old master of the Spring Invitation Cottage who was best at talking on paper. However, Sui Xiagu believed that in today's world, there were at most a handful of idiots like himself who dared to fight with Su Fengnian. Arriving at the right time was better than arriving early. Just as Su Fengnian was facing off against the old man, Wu Luding and Su Hua led the Wu clan cavalry into Liangzhou city and arrived at Mount Qingliang. After entering the prince's estate, their path was unimpeded. The 100-some people abandoned their horses and walked to the other side of Tidehark Lake where the two experts were facing off. These withered swordsmen with long swords on their backs stood in a line. Apart from the sloppy young sword crown and the calm female sword attendants, the chief flow of these 90-some people was affected. Their tranquil minds began to ripple to varying degrees. Even if the spectators did not comment on the game, they could not help but put themselves in the opponent's shoes. This was even more so for the spectators. As a result, their state of mind was affected. Among the 90 or so swordsmen, most of them had dull expressions. Even in the face of Sir Tidehark's rare peak-level confrontation, none of them revealed an expression of shock. There was a proverb at the beginning of the Wu family's genealogy: only when the heart is dead like ashes does the sword come alive. In the end, it was to say that the sword was more important than the person. Forget oneself and remember the sword. Only in this way could the sword be enlightened and enter the divine. The Wu family advocated 2 swords. One type of sword wielding was like a lover who had met with infatuated love. After grasping the sword, they would never change their mind and would die for the sword as if it were for love. The other type of sword wielding was like a descendant who respected their ancestors. They would pay attention to the inheritance of the sword and would often think about how the swordsman who wielded the sword would conduct himself. Wu Luding squatted by the lakeside. Cuihua, who carried the Su of Gojoseon, stood behind him. On the left and right of the sword crown stood a man in his 40s. His surname was Zhu, and he gave off a gloomy aura as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. The other old man stood in contrast. Even if he did not smile, he gave off the impression that he was much kinder. The sword on the old man's back was extremely thin and long. Its width was less than half that of an ordinary sword, but it was as long as 2 ordinary swords. The old man was short and his sword was almost as tall as him. These 2 people were very important even in the sword tomb of the Wu family, which was full of experts. The man Wu Luding privately called Demon Zhu was once Dong Tai's mortal enemy. The 2 of them were once abandoned on the Sword Mountain. From childhood to adolescence, they relied on each other for survival. No one knew why they eventually turned against each other and became enemies. Helion, who was nicknamed the Sword Grandpa, was a martial arts maniac. He was one of the few Beimang swordsmen in the Sword Tomb. The illegitimate son of the Wu family, Dong Tai, fought against him when he left the sword tomb. Helion, on the other hand, was praised by the ancestor of the Wu family as the best in terms of his unique understanding of the sword. The man with the surname Zhu crossed his arms in front of his chest and said sinisterly, "What best in the world? As long as we remove those nails, even I will have a chance to kill him." Although Wu Luding didn't have a good impression of Su Fengnian, he was still impartial when it came to matters and people. In addition, he had always hated Demon Zhu, who had killed many people in the sword tomb. If it wasn't for the fact that Demon Zhu had already left the Wu family, he would have pestered the ancestor to change his mind and not let the tiger go back to the mountain. He and Chuihua didn't believe that 60 dragon-binding nails could trap this person. Therefore, Wu Luding sneered and said, "Don't forget that the current Su Fengnian is a Su Fengnian without Gao Shulu's physique. His strength has been greatly reduced. If Wang Xianji hadn't died, would you have dared to say such words in Martial Emperor City?" The devil laughed mockingly and said, "Whether old monster Wang is dead or not, I won't say that I can defeat him. But since that Su Fengnian has been beaten back to his original state and is only a number one person in the world who doesn't live up to his name, why can't I say it? Can't kill him. As the sword crown of the Wu family, you don't even have this bit of courage. It seems that the Jianghu is destined to be worse with each generation. The Wu family's sword tomb is no exception." Wu Luding was so angry that he glared. Just as he was about to speak, he heard Chuihua say softly, "Zhu Huang, in 3 days, we will decide who the Su of Gojoseon belongs to." Demon Zhu, who had been drooling over the Su of Gojoseon for a long time, chuckled. However, there was a trace of undetectable nervousness in his fiery eyes. Wu Luding was even more flustered. However, he knew Chuihua's temperament too well. He couldn't persuade her with words. Even if he used a few large vats of saliva, it would still be futile unless his swordsmanship was better than hers. At this moment, Wu Luding, who had left the sword tomb to travel the Jianghu for many years, suddenly realized that he might have been too content. He always felt that he would one day reach the top of the sword forest and that there was no need to rush. Wu Luding seemed lazy and undisciplined, but he was also extremely conceited. He thought that his talent was enough to make the entire Jianghu wait for that day. Elder Helion, who had been watching the tide listening pavilion all this time, suddenly said, "I've spent my entire life observing, learning, and comprehending. It's like collecting countless treasures. I want to weave 2 flawless curtains, but I'm limited by my mediocre weaving skills. I have the will, but I don't have the strength. It's said that even the cleverest housewife can't cook without rice. I'm helpless, and I'm even more helpless. I have 10,000 pounds of rice, but I can't cook it. Thus, I've never been able to show these 2 curtains to the world." The elder turned his head to look at the young sword crown and slowly said, "I originally thought that you, Wu Luding, could weave the 2 curtains. However, time doesn't wait for me. I'm already over 80 years old and don't have many days left to live. I might not be able to wait until the day you achieve enlightenment in the way of the sword. Now, I'm fortunate enough to encounter a ready-made one." Chapter 12:16. Wu Luding said with a bitter face, "Marry Grandpa's sword. Just keep it in your heart. Why do you have to say it and make me sad?" The old man smiled and said, "When us old men see that our juniors don't make progress, we will always hate them for not competing." Wu Luding sighed and turned to look at the lake, lost in thought. Other than the most prestigious people in the Wu family's sword tomb, there were also Zhang Wantai, the left-handed swordsman who had once fought with Gu Jiantang, Lu Jianji, the young master of the apricot sword furnace, Yuzhuowu, Han Banjian, and the sword monk Chui Meigong of Western Shu, as well as Nailan Huayu and a few other women who had been in the sword forest for many years. All of them stared at the battle of the pinnacle beside the armory. It was very different from how people imagined it to be when 2 top experts fought. Other than the beautiful scenery of the rippling lake, the only eye-catching scene made the hundreds of people of the Wu family feel as if they had fallen into a fog. Even Zhu Huang, the Hellion sword maniac, and Gong Sun Shui, these top swordsmen, followed the movement of that object with their eyes. A chess piece was thrown high up. It did not reach the top but fell down. It was still jumping to a higher place. Everyone had their own opinions. Gong Sun Shui, the top master of the southern Tang in the past, said to himself, the young king must have built a chessboard. The place where the chess piece is planted is the time when the killing intent is born. Whether the old man with long eyebrows can win or not depends on whether he can break this chess record before the chess piece lands. Nailan Huayu, who was still as charming as before, said with a smile, "What chessboard? In my opinion, that young handsome guy is just putting on airs. He does whatever he wants to do. At his level, no matter how shallow the moves are, they can still be used by him. Isn't it just a matter of looking good?" Yuzuowu, who had almost gone mad from practicing the ancient sword, shook his head and said, "Then you have really underestimated this person. That senior sword chi is overflowing from his body, and his cultivation state may not be lower than Su Fengnian's. There must be a deeper meaning behind his actions. How can a battle of life and death be a game?" The sword monk, who was often called Baldi Chui by Wu Luding, carried a wooden sword, dragon subduing wood, without a sheath on his back. He touched his head and sighed, "The Zen atmosphere here is really strong. It reminds me of the time when I passed by the Dragon Tree Zen master at the back mountain of the two Zen temples. The old monk was covered in mud. With a hoe in hand, he walked towards me and greeted me with a smile. I thought he was just an ordinary monk in the temple and missed him. Later on, when he thought about it, he realized that he was indeed a person who had attained the Tao of the glazed body. No wonder they say that the Su family of Bailiang has been devoutly worshipping Buddha for 20 years. Could it be karma? The chess pieces began to fall. Just when everyone thought that an earth-shattering battle was about to begin, the sword maniac Hellion revealed a look of surprise and said coldly, "It's clear." Shui Hua closed her eyes again. Zhu Huang seemed to have sensed it at the same time. He curled his lips and had a complicated expression. It seemed to be admiration and disdain. Of the remaining 90 or so people, a few of them were obviously slower by half a beat. Most of them did not know what was going on and were still waiting for the thunderous confrontation between the two sides. The chess piece gently landed on the white-browed elder's shoulder. The elder's feet began to sink into the ground. It was only when his knees touched the ground that he stopped falling. Sui Xiagu retracted his gaze from Su Weisheng and raised his hand to casually smash the chess piece. Then, the elder raised his head. There was a hint of anger in his tone. "Whether it's you or Wang Xinji, how come you're not as straightforward as you used to be when you're in the celestial realm? Do you think that this old man is not worthy enough for you to attack with all your might?" Su Fengnian floated to the ground and said calmly, "It's hard to say what Wang Xinji thought of the sword that entered the city. If I could avoid fighting with my life on the line, I wouldn't." Sui Xiagu laughed coldly and asked, "If I attacked Su Weisheng's formation just now, would you be willing to fight with your life on the line?" Su Fengnian did not answer the question directly. He smiled and said, "Senior, you didn't attack, did you?" Sui Xiagu did not speak. However, Su Fengnian dashed forward and blocked in front of Su Weisheng. Sui Xiagu did not attack earlier. However, he purposely bore the full weight of this small kiliocosm. Otherwise, how could a chess piece cause his legs to sink into the ground? In Taoist records, there was once an immortal who used a reed to press down on Mount Buzhou. In the end, the entire mountain collapsed. Regardless of whether this was true or not, even if it was true, it was obvious. However, it was easy to see that before the reed landed on Mount Buzhou, the mountain would have already endured an unimaginable amount of pressure. Sui Xiagu knew better than anyone else that this brat had set up a trap. He had two choices. One was to attack Su Weisheng. The other was to bear the weight of this small kiliocosm. Sui Xiagu, regardless of his original intentions, he chose the more difficult option. This caused the old man to lose to Su Fengnian in the eyes of the spectators. However, for some reason, Sui Xiagu was unwilling to give up. He wanted to fight again. A buzzing sound came from the Tide Listening Pavilion. It sounded like countless mosquitoes and flies were gathered together. Su Fengnian wanted to say something but stopped. In the end, he did not say anything. I will be injured, but you will die. Sui Xiagu, who knew the meaning of this, smiled. He used his fingers to tie a knot and asked, "How do you know if you don't try?" Elder Hellion sighed heavily. He was a little sad. Why do you insist on doing this? Is the world sword path really going to decline in this generation? The Tide Listening Pavilion instantly fell silent. Only one sword flew out of the tall building. Ming Jianshu said. Before Chu Lushan's 1,000 cavalry opened Shu, there was already a green-robed swordsman who opened Shu with his sword. Su Fengnian took a step forward and bent his knees slightly. He put 2 fingers on his right hand together and held his sword with his left hand. He pointed at Sui Xiagu. He pointed at the swordsman who had once exchanged an arm with the old man wearing the sheepskin fur coat. To Li Chungang, no matter how big the world was, he could settle it with one sword. To Su Fengnian, who was drifting further and further away from Jianghu, no matter how good Jianghu was, he could only look at it from the other side as long as he was still the king of Beiliang. Even if the old man wearing the sheepskin fur coat, Elder Huang's sword box and Wen Hua's wooden sword were still in Jianghu. He could only stay in Beiliang, just like Wang Xianji stayed in Martial Emperor City. He stayed in Beiliang and did not care about the world's affairs. However, this did not mean that anyone could cross the line in Beiliang. At this moment, on the surface of the Tide Listening Lake, a large patch of purple gold lotuses suddenly bloomed. They did not seem to belong to the mortal world. They swayed and swayed. They formed a purple gold body in an instant, just like Gao Shulu back then. Sui Xiagu looked up and laughed. He suddenly exhaled. He exhaled thousands of sword auras that he had swallowed for 100 years. During that extremely slow sword strike that entered the marshaled arch city, Wang Xianji's 4 disciples worked together, and it seemed like Yu Groom had blocked the last half of the sword strike. In fact, that sword strike was only half a sword strike. It had form, but no divine intent. At this moment, Sui Xiagu wanted to challenge the world's #1 sword. Chapter 12:17. The first half and the second half were worlds apart. First, Chen Jibao entered the capital to take up the post of Minister of War, drawing a clear line with the Su family. This was a joyous matter. Then, the crown prince position that had been left vacant for a long time was revealed. The various kings left the capital to become vassals, which was also a joyous matter. Then, Yin Mao Chen presided over the evaluation of the officials. It was done methodically, like a butcher dismembering a cow, living up to his reputation as the hidden minister. If not for Su Fengnian becoming the king of Beiliang, the first half of the first year of the auspicious talisman would have been a good thing. Then came the troubled times. Guangling Road was in chaos. Lu Xingxiang, assistant minister of the Ministry of War, became the commander. The vassal King Jing was in trouble. Of the 2 old generals, one died in battle, and the other was still trapped. Hundreds of thousands of elite soldiers were lost just like that. When the frost fell and winter had not truly arrived, it was said that Beimang's million-strong army was going south to the Central Plains. If not for the northwest being their entry point, the Liang court would probably be in deep trouble. However, Lu Xingxiang's position as the commander-in-chief was undoubtedly in jeopardy. The Confucian sage Chao Zhangqing had also appeared on the eastern front of Guangling Road and was confronting the Prince of Guangling, Zhao Yi. At this time, on another even more magnificent eastern front, the great pillar state Gu Jiantang, who was in charge of the military and politics of the northern region, was still biding his time. Chen Jibao, the king of Shu, disappeared without a trace. Zhao Bing, the king of Yanqi, was watching from the sidelines. As the capital of the country, if not for the arrival of Qi Yanglong, who was in his twilight years, the people of Great Peace City would probably be in a state of panic. Every inch of land in Great Peace City was worth its weight in gold. Many officials who could attend court meetings every day worked for 20 years and still could not afford to buy a house. The more they worked, the less they could afford to buy one. A few years ago, there was a tragedy. An official who lived far away drowned in a river in a rainstorm in the morning in order to make it in time for the morning meeting. The current emperor was said to have the country in his hands, but he was an almost stubborn and thrifty ruler. He was also very strict with his relatives in the imperial family. In the past, the relatives of the emperor would take over the property of the people. After the founding of the country, it would get worse in less than a generation. In this dynasty, it was extremely rare. This made it seem like the emperor was different from the other emperors. However, His Majesty the Emperor was never stingy with his generosity to those important officials. Other than that group of scholars who stood out in the spring of Yonghui, there were Chen Jibao, Liu Baijie, and Liu Xingxiang. These three high officials of the Ministry of War lived in the best Vermilion Gate mansions when they entered the capital and were bestowed with countless rewards. However, these people still couldn't compare to Chancellor Qi. The previous owner of Qi Yanglong's residence was a county king who had been stripped of his hereditary title by the previous emperor. His eldest son had long been demoted to the rank of General Zhenggue. This wasn't much. In order to take care of Qi Yanglong, who once called himself Ud Clear Gluttony, the emperor of Zhao family, who never played tricks in the imperial kitchen, specially set up an Ud kitchen in the Qi manor. He found two great masters who were proficient in cooking from the old Donghua territory just to cater to Chancellor Qi's taste. As a result, Qi Yanglong didn't even need to follow the customs of the local officials. The Qi manor was such a treasured land of feng shui, so it naturally made the city's high officials and nobles scramble like ducks. They all considered it an honor to be able to cross the Qi manor's threshold. Regardless of their status and background, busybodies liked to judge by the time they entered the manor. For a time, the Qi manor's main entrance became a dragon's gate. This was an unprecedented grand occasion that hadn't happened even when Zhang Julu was in charge of the Shangshu province. However, this was also related to Grand Secretary Zhang's unreasonable behavior. Chancellor Qi, on the other hand, was completely different. Qi Yanglong didn't reject the luxurious mansion and silk bestowed by the emperor, nor did he reject the elegant book collection bestowed by his colleagues. There were people who roughly estimated that in less than a month's time, the Qi Manor's iron sword Zitherguts building had received no less than 80 books, all of which were paid per page, 1 gold per page. The Great Feng Dynasty's books were publicly acknowledged to be exquisite in paper, simple in style, and excellent in engraving. It must be known that the few most famous private library buildings in the world today were the result of several generations of the family's perseverance and extravagance. Red lanterns were hung high everywhere in the Qi Manor. Qi Yanglong had just sent off the Cave Abyss Pavilion's great scholar Yan Jieshi. He sat across from him and drank 2 jars of aged wine. At this moment, the old man who had come to the library alone seemed to be glowing with health. He wore a thick fur coat. The old man's figure was short and thin, especially in the north where men were all tall and healthy, so he seemed to be unable to bear the burden. The old man arrived in front of the bookshelf. Along the way, he didn't take another look at those priceless books. Instead, he pulled out a Bailiang local chronicle that Gu Jiantang had someone send over. The author was unknown. After the old man flipped it open, for some reason, he read those concise words. He only felt a wave of lonely indignation assaulting his face. The land of Lianglong, the winter is extremely cold, many clothes and skins. Although they have been damaged by rats, they are still hidden deep, all of them using thick fur as clothing. Every time there is a severe winter, the fingers will split the skin, freezing the bones for 1,000 li. The land is extremely high, the people of Lianglong can endure the cold and hunger, valiant, not fearing death. The noble, strong, and lowly old are adept at riding up and down cliffs as if they are flying. They don't need boats to cross rivers, passing by floating horses, excellent in archery and hunting. Chapter 12:18. The old man dabbed in his saliva and flipped through the pages. He read a passage, they grow up on horses and are the most heavily armored soldiers. When mounted, they gather like the wind. When dismounted, they gather like herds. Everyone is a soldier. Millions of households in Liangdi, more than millions in Jiangnan. Those who own this place have the world. Their temperament is unyielding, and they would rather break than bend. Their hearts are fickle, and they are not enough to achieve merit. Those who do not have outstanding military achievements will not be able to seize merit. When my dynasty owns this place, we can control the northwest. It is only a matter of time before we ride our horses up north. When Beimang owns this place, in less than 10 years, we will be in Guangling. The old man unconsciously read this book written many years ago. His expression was sad. The old man already knew who wrote it. His disciple Sun Ping. Compared to Yuan Benshi and Xia Feiyu, he viewed Sun Ping as a scholar to whom he could entrust his legacy. The old man had never felt that anyone deserved to be envied by the heavens. It was said that one's talent was not recognized because one's talent was not high enough. Only his disciple Sun Ping was an exception. If Sun Ping had not died early, the old man believed that he would not have needed to get involved in this mess. Now, it was not just a puddle of muddy water. There were already signs of turbid waves rising to the heavens. No matter who got involved, it would be best for them to get both praise and blame. Feeling sad, the old man silently put the book back on the bookshelf. Very quickly, a steward of the residence came to report that an important guest had come through the back door through Commandery Prince Rong, Zhao Hui. The old man did not seem annoyed at all and only said that he would be there soon. The steward originally wanted to remind his master that Commandery Prince Rong was one of the most important figures in the capital and could not be neglected. However, he quickly felt that his actions were unnecessary. Almost all of the aristocratic families in Tai and city had sent people to visit the Qi residence. Commandery Prince Taiping, Zhao Hui, as the younger brother of the previous emperor, had not visited because of his old age. Thinking about it, the guest this time was nothing more than a descendant of the old Commandery Prince's branch and was not worthy of his master's welcome. Thus, the steward left with a relaxed smile. Qi Yanglong, who did not have a moment to rest, walked to the main hall. He saw the backs of a few young people pointing at a pair of exposed fengshui stones outside the room. These were all good items left behind by the previous owner. They had been left behind because it was too difficult to move. Otherwise, this pair of huge stones from the Spring God Lake that were 2 people high could be sold for 400,000 taels of silver in the capital. The old man was not in a hurry to greet them. He walked over quietly, and when he saw their faces clearly, he smiled. They were all very popular people. Wu Shizhen, whose father was Wu Lingsu, was the former Verdant Gazelle Palace Lord. Now, he was the leader of Taoism in the north. Together with the Taoist master mansion of Longhu Mountain, the 2 Zen temples were personally sealed by him. When a man achieves the Tao, even his chickens and dogs will ascend to the heavens, let alone Wu Shizhen, the only son of Immortal Wu. Wang Yuanran was the youngest son of Wang Xiongui, the minister of the Ministry of Revenue, who was known to have handled the most money in the Liang dynasty. Last time, Wang Yuanran annoyed a large group of descendants of nobles of similar status, and was forced by Minister Wang to kneel in the snow in front of someone's house to beg for forgiveness. After that, he was thrown into the Imperial College and had been quiet for almost half a year. Now, he was probably considered to have made a comeback. Other than these 2 popular young people, there were also 2 grandsons who had made great contributions during the Spring and Autumn War. Following Yan Jinchuan's death in battle and Yang Xinqing's loss of power, the Yan and Yang families' foundations in Great Peace City had been shaken, and their vitality had been greatly damaged. The other families of generals did not feel the same way. The ancestors of the latter who had made great contributions during the Spring and Autumn War had mostly died of old age and illness. They were originally far inferior to Yang Xinqing's Yang family, who was still alive. Yang Xinqing could do whatever he wanted in the west of the capital. Back then, most of the Han family's wealth had been handed over to him, and he had tens of thousands of elite soldiers in Ji province. Many times, the imperial court's decrees were not as important as Yang Xinqing's words. However, as long as Yang Xinqing lost his military power, then he would not just have a general's position, but the entire officialdom of Ji province would be turned upside down, and a large number of 4th and 5th rank local officials with real power would be freed up. When the four saw the old man, who was about a head shorter than them, they all respectfully knelt down and bowed. Qi Yanglong accepted it calmly. After they rose, he smiled and asked, "Other than waiting for me, this old man, you should be waiting for someone else, right? You kids don't have the ability to buy Prince Rong's face." Wang Yuanran was about to speak when a familiar laughter came from behind him. Qi Yanglong turned around and saw 3 visitors. They all had young faces, but compared to the group beside him, whether it was their status or their aura, they were much better. The former 4th prince, the current crown prince Xiao Zhuan. The right chancellor of the Imperial College, Jean Lanting, and a man that Qi Yanglong did not recognize. He was filled with a murderous aura that could not be concealed. Even if he was accompanied by the Crown Prince and Jean Sanlang, he did not have the awareness of being a supporting character. The old man thought for a moment and remembered a person. It should be Yuan Tingshan, Gu Jintang's adopted son, and the son-in-law of Yan Bao in Ji province. The old Gu Lu of the Ministry of War once had a secret file that divided the upper and lower volumes according to age. Those who could be recorded in it, especially the lower volume, in the past 20 years, other than a few people who destroyed their own futures, most of them had reached the high position of a 4th-rank general at the very least. Yuan Tingshan was now in the top 3 of the lower volume. The 3 of them bowed together. Qi Yanglong told them to dispense with the formalities. He sighed and smiled, "It's good to be young."